questioning that and voting accordingly this evening.
Also this evening, a meeting has taken place between ministers and travel industry leaders as disruption at UK airports continues. EasyJet is among the airlines cancelling flights still. Meanwhile, millions of commuters in London are facing more issues tonight with a strike on the London Underground due to finish tomorrow. And the cost of petrol has risen to another record high. The RAC says it's now around £98 to fill a family-sized car with unleaded and £102 for diesel. In the city, the FTSE 100 has closed up 75 points at 76.08. The pound buys $1.25 and €1.17. LBC weather, clear spells for much of the UK tonight. Some rain for northeastern England and the far south, a low of 4 degrees. From Global's newsroom for LBC, I'm Amelia Cox.
This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation. It's 6 p.m. Now, Tonight with Andrew Marr.
Good evening. So, my friends, is this the end for Boris Johnson? Will Tory MPs tonight in a committee room not far from where I'm sitting finally do in giant haystacks? All day I have been selflessly working for you, which in my case means sitting around drinking coffee, talking to Conservatives and hacks in seething, bubbling groups of overexcited plotters and hearing about 400 different guesses as to the result. But you are busy folk. You don't have time for that nonsense. And as of right now, absolutely nobody knows what's going to happen. Hang around if you possibly can for what is going to be an extraordinary evening. And join me later with Iain Dale, where we will give you the result. Now, I've covered every Tory leadership fight since Margaret Thatcher, and Iain knows more about the Tory party than any other broadcaster in Britain, and so together, I promise, we will give you a ringside seat. But meanwhile, there are some things I can tell you. Win or lose, no Tory leader in recent times has fought a leadership contest and survived for long. In 1990, her party forced Margaret Thatcher out. 5 years later, John Major saw off a challenge but was thrashed in the 1997 election. 6 years after that, Ian Duncan Smith was out when he lost a confidence vote. Theresa May won her vote of MPs in 2018 but staggered on for just a few months before having to resign. And so if history's any judge, and maybe it isn't, then Boris Johnson is toast. The only thing we've no idea about is precisely when the smoke will billow from the toaster. It could be tonight. It might be in a few months' time. It might be at the next general election. But looking at the polls and listening to the boos and talking to Tory MPs, I think the country has turned against him in an irreversible way. Sure, nobody knows who might take over yet. The Tories might tear themselves apart for weeks or months, and many will agonise that tonight they have a choice: stick with disgrace today or vote for chaos tomorrow. But before we get on with tonight's show, I'm determined to talk about something else. The weekend's Jubilee celebrations. The booing of Boris Johnson at St Paul's was a heck of a moment, as if the wind in the country had changed. But more than that, I thought the wonderful concert and the parade that followed carried a message about the nature of modern Britain. In all of its wonkiness and its battiness, from the marmalade sandwiches and the bicycling eccentrics to the wild environmental optimism, the palace organisers were telling us that we are a fundamentally tolerant, law-abiding, cheerful, very diverse and good-natured people, a people who don't want to be divided against ourselves and who don't greatly enjoy being taken for fools. Tonight, the Conservative Party, as I say, has a choice. If only Paddington Bear was standing. Joining me now, because Paddington Bear is not standing, is the Business Secretary, Kwasi Kwarteng.
Hello.
Hello. Thank you very much for coming in. Is he toast?
No, I don't think so at all. I think the Prime Minister will win, and then I hope to get behind him so that we can deliver the rest of the programme for government for the Parliament.
All day we have been having messages, texts, emails, phone calls pouring into LBC from Conservative voters, and they're all saying much the same thing. I'd just like to play you two. Sure. There's one after another. They're both Northern Conservatives, and you'll hear them both right now.
Well, I voted for Boris in 2019. Seems to be a man who could do things, and what we've seen that he's shown that he's got no moral fibre, and he'll, as long as he's looking after himself, his friend, that's okay, but the rest of us are really struggling.
I want him as far away as number 10 as feasibly possible, please. I voted for him. Sadly, I actually regret that now. If they've got any backbone about him, they'll get rid of him.
These are loyal Tories. It is over, isn't it?
No, I don't think it is. I think it's very difficult. I think things happened in number 10, which the Prime Minister apologised for.
And were disgraceful.
And he's apologised for them on more than one occasion. But I think that he's got big calls right. I think we've got to focus on making sure that we can actually weather the economic storms that are ahead of us. And that's why I think having a navel-gazing, fratricidal, leadership contest isn't the right thing now.
Let me just read you from a message sent by Conservatives to Conservatives over the weekend. The booing of Boris Johnson at the Jubilee Thanksgiving service tells us nothing. The data does not. There is no social group that trusts him, with even 55% of current Conservatives calling him untrustworthy. If left in post, he'll lead the party to a substantial defeat in 2024. He will lose the red war seats with majorities under 10,000 to Labour, and the blue war seats with majorities up to 20,000 to Liberal Democrats. At least 160 Tory MPs are at risk. So you say it's fluff and it's gossip.
I don't believe that. I mean, Andrew, you know political history as well as anybody. In 1981, the Alliance had 50.5% in polls. You know that.
And in the poll, there was the Falklands War.
But in the poll, they completely collapsed. So what I'm saying is that in 2 years from an election, nobody has any idea as to what's going to happen. Now, is the government in a difficult place? Yes, it is. I think it's a difficult, challenging time. But I think Boris Johnson is absolutely the right person to lead us into the next election.
But this is a question of character, and long-serving, long-time Conservatives have turned against him. The Conservative Home poll, which is a very often quoted and reliable poll of Conservative Party members, now shows 55% think that Tory MPs tonight should vote him out. In a sense, in terms of personality, he has lost it.
No, I don't think so. I think that people have written him off before, many times. And he's come back, and I think he's absolutely the right person to come back and to win. And the point that you made in your opening remarks was quite right. I mean, we don't have an alternative. I think the idea that we spend 3 months, or whatever it might be, finding a new leader and all of that, going through all of that sort of beauty contest, is absurd.
It's very difficult. Can I ask you, if the Conservative Party gets rid of Boris Johnson as leader tonight, what do you think happens to the party?
I think the party will be more disunited. I think one of the issues that you will relive the whole Brexit debate again. People, good friends of mine, are saying, well, we should rejoin the single market, we should look at doing this, that and the other.
Well, there's only one person who said that.
Well, there's one person, but I think a number of people, you're quite right that Tobias said that, but I think a number of people probably share his view. And we're just going to get back into a kind of civil war in the Conservative Party about issues that we'd settled. So I think that's a step backwards. And the Prime Minister got Brexit right. I think he made a strong step on the vaccine rollout. And in Ukraine, I speak to Ukrainian ministers, Ukrainian counterparts, friends, and they're amazed that we're doing this. They're amazed, given the strong line.
It's democracy in the party.
It's true, I agree.
And as I understand it, can you clarify this? If he wins by a single vote, that's it. It's
my view has always been a win is a win. A win is a win.
Even if there are 175 Tory MPs against him, how can he carry on?
A win is a win. As Winston Churchill said, and you're a great fan, I suppose, of what he is writing, he said a majority of one is good enough. And I think a win is a win.
And it depends a bit on the circumstances. I just wonder
circumstances,
how Boris Johnson could actually impose authority and direction on a government where half of them had voted, half of the non-payroll vote at least had voted against him.
So look, the rules are very clear. He has to win a majority, a flat majority. And if he does that, the rules state that he won't be challenged for another year.
So if I'm a Conservative MP and I'm worried about my future, I'm worried about my majority, and I'm looking forward to the Privileges Committee asking themselves whether Boris Johnson lied to the House of Commons, and then I'm worried really about the Tiverton by-election and did the Wakefield by-election, I'm thinking, what about that? What about that? This is my only chance to get rid of him, isn't it? I should act tonight.
I think
vote against
that people should look at their own consciences, look at what this means for the party, but above all, look at what this means for the country in terms of stability and leadership. And I think, on balance, the Prime Minister will get an endorsement tonight and will be able to have space and time to govern and drive his programme.
Are you a little unsettled by how few of your colleagues have come out to support him today?
I'm rather impressed. I see it the other way. I'm a man of natural optimism, and I think dozens of people have come out and tweeted and expressed their support. And I'm confident that will translate into a majority in the vote tonight.
You talked about divided parties. Do you agree with Nadine Dorries that divided parties don't win elections?
They don't generally do, no.
And yours is a divided party tonight,
I think it could be more united. I think, but we've had divisions before. I mean, in the last 10 years, we've had all sorts of debates in the Conservative Party that have been well fought. We had a UKIP insurgency. I had Conservative colleagues defect to UKIP, to another party, and win seats. So we've had a turbulent time, but I think we can come together and win.
Kwasi, you suggested earlier on this was partly about Brexit. This seems to be something that runs all the way through Conservative Party history, but in a sense it's not about Brexit because there are so many prominent Brexiteers. One of them, David Davis, is waiting to come into the studio at the moment, but there are so many more. Mark Harper.
He's not a Brexiteer. I mean, the idea, Mark Harper was the chief whip. I always see this, that Mark Harper was a Brexiteer. He was chief whip under David Cameron, 2015 to 16. He was a Remainer.
And Andrea led some...
She was a Brexiteer.
Yeah, and a lot of the so-called Spartans, again, they're lining up against the Prime Minister on grounds of morality and the way he has run Downing Street, not Brexit. So it's not entirely about Brexit.
So I don't think it is entirely about Brexit. I think, as I've said, what went on in Downing Street, the Prime Minister's expressed deep apologies about. I think that it's not true to say that many of the Brexiteers are against the Prime Minister, but we can have a debate about
Isn't there a fundamental policy principle here, which is something that Steve Baker, another Brexiteer, said as he came out of the 22 committee today. He said you can hear the level of support. The reality is this is a sad day. The Prime Minister's made a strong case, but if he broke the law, he must go, and that continues to be my view. A lot of law-abiding Conservatives think it is as simple as that.
He made a strong case. He's apologised for the things that he got wrong on many occasions. And I think this is actually a distraction. I think what we've got to try and focus on is getting the economy back. I think having unemployment the lowest in 45 years, making sure that we can deal with the cost of living issues. That's what's important.
We will both know more at about 8:45.
Thank you.
Kwasi Kwarteng, thank you so much. I know you need to go and vote, so thank you very much for coming in.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. So, how did the Prime Minister try to woo MPs today? Ben Kentish is LBC's Westminster editor, and he joins me now from Central Lobby. Ben, thanks for joining us. First of all, can you just describe what's going on right now? Because I think voting is already starting. Is that right?
You might be able to hear, Andrew, a lot of noise behind me. Lots of Conservative MPs are starting to mill in this lobby. Some have already headed up the staircase behind me to vote. Others are coming down, having done so. They are going into a committee room just above me. They go into that room, they file in, they're given a ballot paper asking whether they still have confidence in Boris Johnson or not. They tick yes or no, and then they file out. Their phones are taken away, Andrew, so they can't take any photos. That's how intense this process has become. But the noise you can hear behind me is those MPs starting to gather, little huddles of them, lots of hushed conversations, some less hushed conversations about what's going to happen tonight. The question they're all asking, of course, is what is going to happen come 9 p.m? And there is a huge degree of uncertainty as to the outcome, the answer to that question. Pretty much everyone you speak to around here, Andrew, is of the view that Boris Johnson will win this vote. But there are huge question marks over the margin. And there's huge question marks over what will happen if he sneaks home by 10, 20, 30 votes. Some say, those around him say he'll still carry on. A win is a win. Others, including some of his ministers, think that that would be untenable and he'd have to go. But as you can hear and as you can see, MPs are now starting to file up the staircase behind me as they go to cast that crucial ballot.
Well, I've just seen a senior member of the SNP walk behind you. I hope he wasn't voting, but I can see lots of MPs in there, as you say. Let me ask you a little bit about the numbers. I've tried to keep away from the numbers, but when I was hanging around in Portcullis House drinking unhealthy quantities of coffee this morning, the general feeling was that the rebels would probably muster somewhere between 110 and 150 votes, possibly around 145 at the top end. Is that still the view?
Yes, that ballpark's about right, Andrew. Obviously, there's a lot of expectation management. Boris Johnson team said even one vote is still a victory. The rebels are saying, look, the odds are stacked in the favour of the sitting Prime Minister because, of course, they have, in theory at least, government ministers and government whips on their side, although it is a secret ballot. But yes, I think that ballpark is about right. It could be in the upper range of that. And then you get into the sort of permutations, the repercussions. What if he does get 150, 160 even, maybe, MPs voting against him. Can he seriously carry on governing with more than a third perhaps of his MPs having expressed no confidence in him? That's when you get into a real disagreement between those around him who say, of course he can, and if anybody can bounce back from such a blow, he can. And others say, look, if he gets anything upward of about 130, 140 voting against him, then he's toast. It's game over. Whatever happens tonight, Andrew, you're going to have some MPs saying, look, so many MPs in the Conservative Party have said they have no confidence in our leader, he has to go. Others will declare it, if he wins by even 1 or 2 votes, as a resounding success. And all that means, Andrew, all in all, is this row that we've been hearing in recent days, amplified, of course, throughout the course of today, is not going away. When Number 10 say this will draw a line under the matter, unless Boris Johnson wins it by 100, 150, 106, unless he wins it by a margin in the dozens or even into the hundreds, I think it's very unlikely that these arguments that are being rehearsed around here, being hashed out just behind me, in fact, are going to go away anytime soon.
Ben, you have an absolutely thrilling evening ahead, and we're going to be hearing more from you later on. But for now, thanks very much indeed for talking to us. Thanks. That's Ben in the lobby there. Now, coming up, we're going to speak to an MP who was one of the first proper big beasts of the Conservative Party to say the Prime Minister should go in public. And he's a Brexiteer too. David Davis joins me next. The time is 6:16.
Follow live the fallout of the PM confidence vote throughout the day here on LBC. Leading Britain's conversation, LBC, tonight with Andrew Marr.
Where it's coming up to 6:19, and I'm joined by somebody who knows his fair share of confidence votes and Tory leadership contests from both sides of the fence. David Davis, former Brexit Secretary and Chairman of the Conservative Party. David, welcome.
Thank you.
You stood up famous in the House of Commons and quoted Cromwell, "In the name of God, go." A very dramatic moment a little bit earlier in the year. Now, it is just possible, is it not, that Boris Johnson might actually lose tonight's vote?
It's possible. I mean, the truth is, anybody who tells you they know the outcome is fibbing.
Indeed, of course.
I mean, the truth is there are probably about 10 segments of the party, 10 different leadership candidacies and so on. All of it's not talking to each other, so it's incredibly chaotic. Frankly, the most chaotic situation in the party I've ever seen.
Now, I always try, as you know, to be very fair-minded, so I'm going to try and put you, as it were, the Boris Johnson case tonight, which is that whatever you think of Boris Johnson, the public seem to be turning against him, as I said. If you have a leadership contest, there are so many different groups and factions, there will be absolute chaos for weeks and weeks and weeks. And in the middle of this crisis, the Ukraine war and the cost of living crisis, the public will hate that even more than they dislike Boris Johnson.
Well, not necessarily weeks and weeks and weeks. I mean, if the 22 committee decides, they could have a series of. Let's imagine we have 10 candidates.
I'm told there are 10, by the way.
It's entirely possible. Then, and they winnow down over a week or so, and so you get that. They could say to the party in the country, right, you've got to do this in a week. Birmingham Monday, York Tuesday, whatever. If they put their mind to it, they could do that. So that's possible. But look, that level of chaos or indirection or whatever in the middle of a crisis is not unusual. Margaret Thatcher went during the Gulf War,
Yeah, I remember it very well.
Yeah. Chamberlain, of course, went during the Second World War. I mean, so these are not that unusual. And the truth is, if you get an outcome which is decisive and stabilises the party, which is the opposite of where it is now, then that's safer than what we've got at the moment.
Seems to me that both sides are disorganised at the moment. Unless you know better, I don't think there was any effective whipping or lobbying operation coming from Number 10 over the weekend right into this. Lots of waverers haven't even been called, and I gather the chief whip has been on holiday. So it's extraordinary from that side. But on, as it were, the rebel side, if I can call it that, there is no they. There is no single campaign. Lots of different people have put in letters at different times. And many people, I was talking to one prominent anti-Johnson Conservatives who said, we've completely bogged it up, we've gone far too early, we should have waited until after the by-elections. So in a sense, both sides are disorganised.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, I haven't had a call from the whip's office, but then I wouldn't.
Yeah, I'm not surprised by that.
But you may remember when I gave him my Cromwell quote, or indeed my Leo Amery quote, it's both. I said that this is liable to be a death of 1,000 cuts and will go on until the autumn. Now, why did I say that? Because if you are putting yourself in the position of a would-be challenger, the autumn's much more likely to give you the result you want.
But how would it happen in the autumn, David? If he wins tonight, however bad, as it were, the scrutiny committee is for him, and that seems to be a dangerous moment, however bad the Tiverton and Wakefield by-elections are, and those are also very important, there is no mechanism to get him out then.
No,
he just hangs on.
That's why the person you interviewed and said we bogged it up or whatever was right, because he's, in theory at least, he's given a year's respite. And that's right. By the way, I approve of that. I didn't agree with the idea of shortening that period when that pressure was brought to bear on Theresa May, because you've got to bear in mind every Prime Minister in the future will be under permanent instability if you do that. So there's that. But the simple truth is there are a variety of mechanisms. Mechanism number one, you talk about the scrutiny of the Privileges Committee.
Yeah.
The Privileges Committee finds that he has broken the rules of the House. They could actually say you're no longer an MP for a month or whatever, and you can't be a Prime Minister if you're not a member of the House of Commons. So all
try and find a way, I'm sure.
No, but what I'm saying to you is there are various angles through it, and it's
the cabinet, of course, can act at any point if they would. Again, seems unlikely.
Doesn't seem to me a high probability, and doesn't even seem to be a high probability he'd pay any attention if they did. He just sacked them, I think. Or he might call an election or whatever. So all sorts of. We are literally in no man's land here, and I mean no man's land. There's no map for this.
One of the arguments, I was alluding to it earlier on, is that apart from Boris Johnson, there may be nobody in the Conservative Party at the moment who could actually unite it, given the differences on Brexit, given the differences on economic policy and the role of the state and so forth. Can you think of anybody who could come through and bring the Tory party by and large together?
Well, I don't know. That sort of depends on how the leadership contest plays out.
It's a big question, because if I was a Tory who I was wobbling tonight and the answer to that question was no, there isn't anybody, I might well vote for Boris Johnson.
Right. Well, when Margaret Thatcher was deposed, nobody knew that John Major would be her successor.
No, we all thought Michael Heseltine would be her successor.
Exactly. The most divisive character at that
prowling
time.
Around, yes.
So, that is not, this is a sort of new thesis that somehow you've got to know the successor before you dispatch the previous one. So that doesn't fly. The other thing is the way the system works is an elimination system, and you end up voting. The person who wins ends up getting a majority of the vote. And normally speaking, didn't happen incidentally under Boris, and it may well be one of the first cracks. What normally happens is the person who comes second gets a senior post too. So you end up with a team of two. You get a leader, but it's a team of two, When Cameron beat me, I was Shadow Home Secretary, and that held it together.
Let me talk about today, David, because as I said earlier on, you were there for the the fall of Margaret Thatcher, as I was too, and I can remember being a very, very vigorous member of the Whip's office at the time of John Major too, and all of that. So what right now would a good Whip's operation be doing to save the Prime Minister?
Well, it would be obviously trying to persuade as many, identify all the real waverers, not people like me who will have decided, or indeed the ones on the other side, and find the real waverers and put as much pressure as possible on them. By pressure, I mean persuasion in this context. Secondly, managing the expectations. One of the biggest things that protected John Major when he ran against John Redwood was the expectation management outcome at the end. When the result came out, we had a series. I mean, I wrote the bloody thing. We had a series of things saying that this number of votes is a record since X. This number of votes is a record since Y.
Without being rude, this lot are not very sophisticated, are they?
Doesn't look like it. Doesn't look like it. And from what you were saying about people not being here, not being called up, and so on, it does sound like the system has not worked.
So if the Conservative Party is looking for a safe pair of hands, they might be looking for somebody who has got Brexit credentials but is liked on the Liberal wing of the party. Are there any circumstances in which you would run yourself?
Oh, God, I mean, don't even think about that. I mean, my view on this is let's get us through this phase and then we'll see who comes up. I don't know who's going to
David, that's not quite a no, is it?
Well, no, whoever says no, but the truth is it's not on my horizon. And the fact is that we've got a difficult unification operation, and that will be done by the election process. Whoever comes out at the end of it.
Now, you have, as I say, you've seen this from both sides for a long time. So I'm going to end by asking you, brutally, what do you think is going to happen later on tonight?
Well, I think Boris will win technically, but I think it will be a psychological defeat. In the sense there'll be a very large number of people voting against, probably more than they're expecting, because I suspect quite a lot of ministers who are obviously publicly saying they're voting one way will vote the other. Somebody said to me a third will be in that position. That's a lot of people.
A lot of people, if he's going to be an effective Prime Minister afterwards, who have come out against him.
That's the problem. The real problem of their calling this early is that we may end up with a sort of paralysed government, or a populist government. Where everything they do is just designed to try and curry favour with one sector of the population or another, and that's quite dangerous. That's where governments go wrong. They get it.
It's not an appetising prospect at all. I can see Rishi Sunak walking out of the committee, I think, there. So he's just voted.
Yeah.
David Davis, thank you very much indeed for that. Somebody who's been listening to that, you know an awful lot about the Conservative Party, but my co-presenter on LBC, Iain Dale, also knows a great deal about the Conservative Party. I think more than any other, certainly regular broadcaster in the British media scene.
We won't have a competitive quiz.
No competitive quizzes, but Iain, you were listening to that, and it's like your thoughts. We're going to be talking together later on as this
for 3 hours.
For 3 hours as this extraordinary evening unfolds. You're looking out with a slightly sadistic smile on your face, Iain.
Absolutely. Well, I said earlier, there may well sort of hold on tight, because there may be a few bumps in the road tonight, and I don't think we're going to be providing the bumps, but I suspect that the result at 9 o'clock may be a little bit closer than a lot of pundits are saying.
I am with you. I'm absolutely with you. There's just something in the air, isn't there?
We're going to have to try and disagree about something.
Well, we'll find lots to disagree about, I am sure. But for now, we're going to be talking about that later on. Can we just, before we leave this, explain to people what the likely timings are tonight?
Well, the voting finishes at 8, and for some reason they need an hour to count 359 votes. I was tempted to ring up Graham Brady, who used to be my researcher, believe it or not.
No.
Yeah, absolutely. We can talk about that later. Because if he needs help with the counting, I'm sure that you and I could help.
We're very happy to pop in.
It's going to take them an hour until they give the result, which they say will be on the dot of 9. Now, have you ever seen, Andrew, these things happen on time? I don't think I have. We might have to do a bit of filling at 9.
Well, I'm going to be sticking around for that show. You told me that I'd have to be here until 8:45, and now you tell me it's 9, and it's probably 9:50 and 9:30. I can see that
you're here for the duration.
Glistening pint vanishing in front of me as the evening goes on.
Yeah, never be an employee of Iain Dale, is the answer.
Yeah, this is
absolutely. Might end up running the Conservative Party. David, Iain, thanks both very much for the moment. Now, coming up, does a Boris Johnson victory tonight actually help or hinder the Labour Party? I'll be asking Emily Thornberry, and we'll be getting reaction from outside the Westminster bubble as well. Meanwhile, it's 6:29 and Amelia Cox has your news headlines.
The Business Secretary has told LBC a win is a win as Conservative MPs begin casting their ballots in tonight's confidence vote. Boris Johnson has told backbenchers their party is an incredible force when united in a meeting earlier. He'll need 180 to back him in order to stay in office. Voting will conclude at 8 p.m. this evening and the result is due to be announced an hour later. Also this evening, EasyJet's cancelled another 37 flights today as many British tourists struggle to get home after half-term and the Jubilee weekend. People in London have also had to deal with a tube strike as they return to work and school. LBC weather, clear spells for much of the UK tonight. Some rain for northeastern England and the far south, a low of 4 degrees.
Follow live the fallout of the PM confidence vote throughout the day here on LBC. This is LBC Tonight with Andrew Marr.
The time is 6:32. You're listening tonight with me, Andrew Marr, on what is yet another tumultuous day here at Westminster. As I speak, Conservative MPs are deciding on the future of Boris Johnson. Now, this is all being done in Westminster by the Tory party, effectively deciding for the country, once again, who will be Prime Minister of the whole country. We'll be heading to one of Britain's most marginal seats in the Red Wall to hear how that's going down. But first, the Labour Party are no doubt rubbing their hands with glee this evening, but which the result tonight is better for the Labour Party? Well, joining me now is the Shadow Attorney General, Emily Thornberry. Emily, let's talk Turkey. The best thing for the Labour Party is Boris Johnson to win tonight, but only narrowly, and to be badly wounded, and for this ghastly episode to carry on.
You're such a cynic. I mean, actually,
just asking about practical.
I think that what we need is what's good for the country, and we really don't need to have a Prime Minister who thinks he's above the law. I mean, look at what he has done. He presided over a culture at Number 10 that broke the rules and everybody thought it was fine. He still wasn't accepting that he had really done anything that wrong, telling, Mumsnet that it was his duty to attend leaving parties, and then he lied to Parliament.
This is my point exactly. It's not so much cynicism as realpolitik. For a long time now, the Labour Party's fundamental position has been, look at that guy, look at that man, he's terrible, let's get... Now, if you're confronted by somebody who has got a much cleaner reputation, shall we say, who is a much more centre Conservative, perhaps, then you're going to have to rethink an awful lot of what you do as the opposition.
Well, I think that what we should be doing is, even if we get at somebody else who's Prime Minister, who I will fundamentally disagree with as well, at least they won't be undermining the office of Prime Minister. At least they won't be trying to break the law. At least I certainly hope not. Won't be passing laws in order to allow them to pass the laws. All of these things, the cavalier way in which this Prime Minister just thinks he can do whatever he likes, is unacceptable, completely unacceptable. undermining the institutions of our great country is just not on. And we need to have somebody else, and any of the others, frankly, so long as they say they're going to keep to the law and are going to do the right thing in that way, then I'm more than happy to go toe to toe with them and argue with them in terms of politics and what they may be doing wrong. But he has been fundamentally just breaking the rules. And with an unwritten constitution, we have to take these things on trust.
I've been around a long time. I can vividly remember 1990 when Margaret Thatcher was under pressure, and Neil Kinnock, who's a guy I like very much indeed, and the Labour leadership thought at the time that they were going to win the next election. And the Conservative Party very, very quickly and ruthlessly dispatched Margaret Thatcher and put in John Major. And then I'm thinking, same thing happened in 2018 with Theresa May. Again, they moved out of Theresa May and into Boris Johnson, and in both cases they hammered you at the next general elections. And I just put you that you're perhaps being a little bit naive as a party. The Conservatives are ruthless. If they think he's not a winner, they'll put in somebody they think will be a winner, and politics will change in this country quite quickly.
I hear you, and I understand what you're saying, but I do think that politics has changed. I don't think that we have the kind of Conservative Party that we used to have. The Conservative Party that we used to have was something much different. Had different politics to the Labour Party, but still stuck to the rules. Now we have a populist party which surrounds itself, goes around a particular leader, and that leader is somebody who is quite happy to simply rule by sound bites, by populist phrases, and is an absolute master at that, breaking the rules, kind of swaggering around and so on. And so how do they replace him? They can't replace him with someone like that. So I think they're in a different place. And I think that many of the liberal-minded Conservatives who I meet and I speak to agree with me, agree that this is not the Conservative Party they recognise.
Left field thought, Emily. I was watching, as I'm sure you were, the Jubilee celebrations, and it was a very inclusive, optimistic, upbeat, small L liberal kind of event. And I just wonder if Boris Johnson has a really bad night tonight, how much the Jubilee will be something that historians look back at and say that was part of the story. Because it not only did Tory MPs go back to their constituencies and talk to their constituents at great length, not only was there booing at St Paul's, but we were shown, in a sense, a different model of leadership and a different kind of country.
Yes, and an optimistic one, and one that we could believe in, and one that we could believe could be better. And I think that's what politics ought to be about. I mean, I have to say, I missed it, but I'm told that Theresa May turned up in a ball gown tonight in order to vote, wearing spangly shoes. I can understand.
Theresa May, somebody who is always more eloquent with her clothes than her small talk, but that's fantastic to hear. Maybe we can hear more about that, because this is an evening, if you'll forgive me, of breaking news, and it's moving every 5 minutes or so. Ben Kentish, LBC's Westminster editor, is joining us again from Central Lobby. Ben, what can you tell us?
Andrew, MPs are queuing just above me now, going into that committee room. Rishi Sunak's just been in to vote. Penny for his thoughts, you would wonder. Theresa May, last time, of course, this was her. Someone said to her as she walked in, it's better to be on this end, isn't it, Prime Minister? And she gave a big smile and a laugh. There's a big queue for MPs voting. There's a lot of uncertainty. There's a lot of anticipation. I asked one cabinet minister in the last few moments, Andrew, can Boris Johnson continue whatever happens tonight as long as he wins? What happens if he wins by one vote? What happens if he wins by 5 votes? Fascinating answer. That cabinet minister replied, well, in theory he could continue, but in practice only if he can reconcile the party. And that is not the line being pushed by number 10. The line being pushed by number 10 is a victory, even if it's a vote of 1.
That is dead interesting, Ben, because, of course, Kwasi Kwarteng, who was on this programme just now, again said, a victory of 1 is a victory, end of story. Can I ask you, meanwhile, I'm just talking to Emily Thornberry here, is it true that the previous Prime Minister appeared in a ball gown tonight? Did you see her?
Yes,
Theresa
absolutely
May.
Correct, Andrew. Sparkly ball gown. Someone said to her jokingly, "You've even dressed up for the occasion, Prime Minister." She was obviously off to some sort of dinner, some sort of event. She did cast her vote here. She seemed pretty relaxed. But of course, Boris Johnson will be hoping that he does better than Theresa May did back in 2018. I've got to say though, Andrew, the briefing, which has been a lot of expectation management, as you'd expect throughout the day, the briefing from some of the rebels is now now that they think they could have as many as 150 MPs who vote against Boris Johnson tonight. That would be a worse result than the one Theresa May suffered. She eventually, of course, had to go. Boris Johnson is not Theresa May. He will try to cling on even if he wins by one vote. But if they get to anything like 150 or upwards, things are going to be pretty difficult for the Prime Minister.
Pretty difficult for the Prime Minister and pretty difficult for the Conservative Party in the Cabinet as well. Ben, thank you very much. Emily Thornberry, thank you so much for coming in to talk to us as well. Now then, we've been talking so far about the proceedings from here at Westminster, but what's about the rest of the country? What about the region where Mr Johnson did things no other Tory ever has, the so-called Red Wall? Well, Helen Pidd is the Guardian's North of England editor, and she was today in Bury North, the most marginal seat in the UK. Thank you very much indeed, Helen, for joining us. Now, as I was saying, this has been very, very much today a Westminster story, but it's a Westminster story based on what Tory MPs are hearing in the rest of the country. So just give us a sense of what's going on in Bury North. Have you been talking to people about it? I guess people are as interested there as they are anywhere else in the country and in London centrally. But what is the mood? Is there a sense that something is being imposed upon them tonight?
Well, every single person that I spoke to in Bury North today unprompted brought up Partygate. So there's absolutely no doubt at all that it's got massive cut through. And I headed to the most sort of true blue Tory ward in Bury North because I wanted to see if people were changing their minds. And there were people who were absolutely furious. People, often if you're standing there as a reporter with a notepad, people kind of run away from you. But people were coming up and saying, I can't believe it, he's got to go. So there was some genuine anger there. But the interesting thing for me, I suppose, was also talking to the Tory MP there, James Daly, who has pledged his loyalty to the Prime Minister. He says that he's had no guarantee from any of the contenders. Sorry, somebody's outside my house. Sorry. That nobody else has promised investment in the north, so he was going to stick by him. But he seems to be very much out of kilter with the voters that I met today.
That's very interesting, Helen, because we keep being told that this is not really a big issue amongst the electorate. It's cost of living, and then third, cost of living, and that Partygate no longer cuts through. I wonder, my theory is that the Jubilee weekend has quite a big aspect of this. MPs have been back with their constituents, having street parties and meeting them and talking to them at longer length than usual, perhaps. Do you think that's part of the story there?
Yeah, definitely true. Actually, I live in Stockport in Greater Manchester, and the Tory MP William Ragg, one of the sort of early rebels, came to the party, and I was chatting to him, and people were definitely coming up to him to share their views. So yeah, I think that people have been talking to each other, sharing their thoughts, and I suppose there were quite a few people today who said, you know what? The parties themselves, it wasn't good that that those in number 10 were not following the rules, but I would have accepted it if they'd just put their hands up and said, yeah, we shouldn't have done it, it was wrong. It was lying about it that really got to people. There was one elderly woman in a mask who just came up to me and she said, I want politicians to have dignity, I want them to have decency, I want them to be honest, and that's all absent. But I suppose the other interesting take home for me is wondering where these voters are going to go next, because from the people I spoke to today, it wasn't necessarily that they will lend their vote to Labour instead. The jury's very much still out on Keir Starmer.
Helen Pidd, a brief puncture from outside the bubble, a brief message from beyond the Westminster bubble. Much, much appreciated. Thanks very much indeed. All day there have been all manner of polls to focus Conservative MPs' minds as they cast their votes on the Prime Minister's future. Now, Chris Curtis is a pollster at Opinium, and he joins me now. Chris, thanks for coming on the show again. Can I ask you, if you're a Conservative MP, and if I'm a Conservative MP and I come to you and I say, what are the essential facts that I need to brood over before I cast my vote tonight? What are they? In polling terms, obviously.
I mean, well, the key one is that voters have lost faith in the Prime Minister. Our poll today shows that Boris Johnson should be pretty damn well thankful that it's Conservative MPs deciding his future tonight and not voters out there in the public, because 56% say that they think that Tory MPs should vote to get rid of the Prime Minister tonight, over twice the number that think that they should keep him. More people tell us he's untrustworthy than trustworthy, incompetent than competent. More tell us that they think he's strong than weak, and more people, by quite some distance, disapprove of the job he's doing than approve of the job he's doing. I'm not going to lie to you, Andrew, it's hard to pick five because it doesn't matter what question we're asking about the Prime Minister at the moment. We're a lot more likely to get a negative response than a positive response.
Kwasi Kwarteng, the business secretary I was talking to at the beginning of the show, made the argument that there's still 2 years to go to the election. Boris Johnson can turn this around. People's memories aren't that long, ... etc., etc. What do you say?
I'd say that if you're banking on the electorate having short memories, you're probably sort of already onto a losing argument. I mean, it is true that voters are ready to move on. Partygate's massively damaged the Conservative Party, but voters say we have heard enough about that now. We do want to be talking about other issues like the cost of living. If the Conservative MPs think that will save them, I'd quite like to understand what the theory of change is here. Your theory is, we're in a really bad situation. Voters have lost a lot of faith and a lot of trust in the current government, but it's fine because they're all about to get significantly poorer and the economy might be about to go into a recession. And because of that might mean that we end up in a situation where they vote for us at the next general election. The next 12 months was always going to be an incredibly, incredibly difficult time for the Conservatives. Cost of living is not a ground that a Conservative Party enjoys playing on. And yet they're going into that situation with a Prime Minister who has lost a lot of faith and trust from members of the public over Partygate. And I think that's going to be a really, really difficult situation for them indeed. And I think every Conservative MP should be bearing that in mind as they go to vote this evening.
Well, I'm tossing arguments at you, and it's a bit like throwing vegetables into a threshing machine. But I'm going to try one more, because some Conservatives would say this is all very well, but if Boris Johnson is voted out tonight, and if there is therefore a leadership contest, that means quite a long period of turmoil. And as Nadine Dorries, the Culture Secretary, was saying today, divided parties simply don't win elections. Is it not possible that a period of turmoil inside the Conservative Party would be even more unpopular with the public than Boris Johnson?
But I mean, it's certainly true. Voters don't like divided parties and voters don't like turmoil. But we have, a very recent case study in this. If you came and had this conversation with me in May 2019, I'd have said, it's a really difficult situation. The public's lost faith in the Prime Minister. They're no longer willing to vote for the Conservatives because of it. And I'm not sure how the Conservative Party turn it around from here without a change of leadership. And you could have thrown that argument around to me legitimately. But over the next few months, the Conservatives went through a lot of turmoil, possibly more turmoil than they've been through in decades. They went through a leadership contest. They replaced the leader with Boris Johnson. He completely changed the entire cabinet. He kicked a load of MPs out of his party, but he followed a strategy that won faith back in the Conservative Party from voters and meant that he went on to win that landslide election victory. People sort of think back and think, the 2019 general election was won because Boris has some sort of magic touch that means voters will not vote for him. It wasn't. It was won because Boris Johnson implemented this strategy that took the party from a place where the voters had no faith in them to a place where the party was trusted to best deliver Brexit. They're going to have to go through the same kind of transformation if they want to win the next general election. I think it's going to be incredibly difficult for that kind of transformation to happen under Boris Johnson's leadership.
Chris, really, really interesting. Thanks very much indeed. Just before we go to a break, I want to read out, because we've had messages pouring into LBC all day, and they're really interesting, and they're all going in the same direction. The Jubilee, says James from Surrey, put into sharp focus the difference between venal ambition and integrity and duty. If the Tory party don't vote him out today, they're doomed to lose the next election, and deservedly so. I could read out to you about 30 or 40 messages, almost exactly the same. Haven't got time. Coming up, I'm going to be joined by some seasoned Westminster watchers who can hopefully give you some of the most well-informed predictions around. We really need them. The time is 6:48.
Coming up at 7 on LBC, Iain Dale.
Conservative MPs are at this moment deciding Boris Johnson's future. Andrew Marr, Ben Kentish and I will bring you the result and the best analysis. We promise.
Iain Dale on LBC.
With
LBC. Nick Ferrari at breakfast.
Sir Roger Gale, Conservative MP for North Thanet.
I submitted my letter 18 months ago after the Barnard Castle affair.
Over the last 18 months, many of his allies, Sir Roger, would point to issues such as the Ukraine, but that's not coloured your thinking.
I absolutely agree. Mr Johnson and the government, of course, have done everything they possibly can to assist Ukraine. That said, unfortunately, there have been so many other instances of things that have gone wrong. I think the time has come when we have to say that the party is divided. Mr Johnson said himself, divided parties don't win elections. We have to have a new leader to take us through that.
Follow the fallout of the Prime Minister confidence vote with a Nick Ferrari at breakfast special. This morning from 6, only on LBC. This is LBC Tonight with Andrew Marr.
And it's 6:50, and this is a night of news breaking fast. John Lamont MP has resigned as PPS to the Foreign Secretary in order to vote against Boris Johnson tonight. Now, over at the Commons, where there's still an hour before the ballot closes, almost everybody will tell you that Boris Johnson will win this vote and win it relatively easily. But I sense that that's not quite right, and it could be tougher than he thinks and that Number 10 think. I'm joined by two people who will all have a very good insight on how this evening could play out. Fraser Nelson is editor of The Spectator and Jenny Russell is a Times columnist. But first, Tim Bale, Professor of Politics at Queen Mary University of London and author of The Conservative Party from Thatcher to Cameron. Tim Bale, thanks for joining us. I didn't know you were there because it was all blank and then you popped up, so welcome particularly. The Tory party has a habit of doing this pretty regularly, doesn't it?
It does. I mean, we only have to look back to 2018 when Theresa May was subject to a vote of no confidence, which she just managed to get through. I think it was 200 to 117. But within 6 or so months, she was gone.
Yes. So in a sense, I was saying at the top of the show, actually to have a leadership contest has meant so far in recent history that you're toast one way or another. Either the voters get you or the MPs get you. But one way you get got.
Yes, and I think the problem with the vote of no confidence is that unless you win it very, very comfortably, there's always going to be a sense that you have been wounded or winged. That you haven't quite got the authority in the party that you used to be able to command. And I think that will be the problem for Boris Johnson tonight, if, of course, he wins. And we can't completely rule out the possibility that he will lose because these things have a habit of spinning or snowballing out of control.
Tim, don't go away. Jenny, it is not impossible that by 9 o'clock tonight we will find out that Boris Johnson has lost this vote and is standing down as Prime Minister.
Well, that's not what any of the pundits think, but rather like you, I think that I think, and perhaps it's partly that I hope, that there are a great many Tory MPs who are going to be so truly disgusted by the fact that we're led currently by a man with no integrity, and who don't wish to be tainted with that, and who understand that the electorate are not going to forgive him for it, and therefore their best hope is in the secret ballot to get rid of him and replace him with somebody who has a chance of winning the next election, that I think more of them may vote against him than is said publicly. I certainly know that a couple of cabinet ministers who have been professing loyalty today have no intention of voting for Boris Johnson in private.
Really? That's extraordinary. I mean, because we assume, don't we, Fraser, the so-called payroll vault, all the ministers, right down to the most junior PPSs, will vote for the Prime Minister. That's how it works.
Well, they're supposed to vote. We all know, for example, there are something 28 only Tory MPs who are on the record against him, but we know that there are 54 who've put in their letters asking him to be removed. Now, the difference between those two figures... Are you suggesting they're not totally trustworthy? Well, I think there are a lot of members of the government who have put, not a lot, but I know that there are some members of the government who've put in letters saying he should go as leader, but they're not saying so in public because obviously you need to resign. We've had one resignation, John Lamont, who's a Scottish MP who resigned just a few moments ago to do that, but most members of the government, I think, rather
try and keep the job and vote the way they want anyway.
It's a bit weaselly, isn't it? But there is a lot of that going on. But that makes the overall number so much harder to predict. The rebels are saying it was going to be 120. Now, if they think saying that, they probably think it's going to be more. It takes 181 to get rid of him. So it's
a big jump, isn't it? Yeah, from 120. Yeah, this morning I was hanging around in Portcullis House, drinking coffee and talking to people, and the general feeling was somewhere between 115 and 145 at the top level. Is that, broadly speaking, what you expect?
Well, yes, but nobody really knows for sure. I mean, because people aren't straight with each other, I think it's incredibly difficult to predict. I think what we can imagine is that there are more people will vote against him and are admitting so right now. But because of his sort of mass dishonesty in the Tory ranks, everybody is really in the dark.
Tim Bale, I was thinking back to my first leadership contest, as it were, which was Margaret Thatcher. Very, very dramatic, people bursting into tears in the lobbies and all that. Right the way through to this and all the people in between, including, of course, John Major and the Maastricht rebels. The single thing that unites them all, and I think it's all one story, is Europe. The Conservative Party has been ripping itself apart over Europe for 32 years now. And this, I would suggest, is merely the latest episode in that long story.
I think there's something to that. But to be honest, I think that this is less about a particular issue or policy than it is about Boris Johnson's character and leadership. If you remember, obviously, back to 1990 when Margaret Thatcher was deposed, it was to some extent about that, but it was also about the poll tax, and there was no way of getting rid of the poll tax.
It's always about something else as well.
Margaret Thatcher, exactly. With Boris Johnson, it's not really about policy. I mean, there are people, obviously, who are worried about tax rises, et cetera, but I do think that the Partygate and the character of the Prime Minister and the fact that so many voters seem to have, some would say, got wise to his character and are no longer prepared to give him the benefit of the doubt is one of the big problems for the Conservative MPs. And the other thing, of course, it has to be said, policy or no policy, it's to do with whether they think he can win them the next general election. And if they don't think he can do that, then there will be many who vote to make a change.
Self-interest, yeah. Jenny, you were, if I may say so, forthright about the Prime Minister's character a moment ago. But let me ask you about Europe, because I assume if Boris Johnson did have to go, a lot of the cabinet would go. We'd have effectively suddenly a new government. And the Conservatives, do they not, have this problem that they are still at some level divided between true believer hard Brexiteers, anti-Brexiteers, Remainers and all the rest of it. It's very, very hard to think of anybody who would be a genuinely unifying character after Boris Johnson.
I think that's right, and I think that is a problem, but I think it is a lesser problem. I think at the moment their key issue is that they've got a leader who, whether people are Brexiteers or Remainers, a great many people who voted for him in the past will never vote for him again. And therefore, it doesn't really matter what his policies are now. I live partly in Gloucestershire, and I'm surrounded by countryside Brexiteers, the kinds of people who are church wardens and do the flowers.
Lots of corduroy trousers.
Absolutely committed to Boris and to Brexit and voted for him. And they are all, to a person now, say they will never vote for him again because they can't vote for a Prime Minister who lies. So I think this issue has transcended that. And as Tim Montgomery said today, the leading Conservative thinker, if you have a whole Tory party that decides to back a leader that behaves like this, they too will be dangerously tarnished in the electorate's eyes.
Yes. Fraser, let me ask you about another aspect of this, which I wonder whether, if it goes badly for Boris Johnson tonight, really badly, people will look back on, which is the Jubilee. I mentioned at the top of the show, but we've had the Jubilee weekend. There was the booing of Boris Johnson St Paul's. But then there was quite a long period when Tory MPs went back for longer than usual to their constituents, mingled at street parties and so forth, and got a lot of quite salty views about the Prime Minister. It seems that, because they were distracted or not, I don't know, over that weekend, there was no whipping operation at all coming from Number 10. So there's no attempt to kind of shore his position up. I think the chief whip was supposed to be on holiday, I was told today. So do you think that actually we'll look back at, and then, of course, there's the sort of moral aspect of being presented with the Queen as an exemplar of duty, self-restraint, always obeying the rules and all of that. It's not exactly a perfect match for the Prime Minister at this moment.
No, but I'd be more inclined to put it down to the fact that Parliament was in recess and that they had to wait until Parliament was back to do this. So it could well be that they passed the threshold before the Jubilee. But as you say, Andrew, people are taking sound checks, not just in their constituencies, but those who are campaigning in Wakefield with by-elections coming up. And the sounds are not very good, that Boris Johnson is going down very badly. Now, remember, the Tory MPs have never really liked Boris Johnson, not very much. They got him in because he was a vote winner. He was a person who had the cut through with the public, a cut through with the red wall. Now, when he loses that, if it can no longer be said, but this chap will win you elections, then they've got no more reason to back him. So I think that is what has changed. I don't think, but there's also one big thing which nobody's really talking about. That in politics, it's never a do you like him or not question. It's will the other person be better?
And we don't know who the other person is. I would suggest Ben Wallace, but we can talk about that another day. Every syllable, every second takes us nearer to the real result. Tim, Jenny, Fraser, thank you all very much indeed. Make sure you stay tuned to LBC, however, for the rest of the evening as all the drama unfolds. We should know Boris Johnson's fate at around 9 p.m. Coming up tonight, it's Tom Swarbrick, but right now, with Andrew Marr alongside him, it's Iain Dale.
Thanks, Andrew. Now, don't go anywhere. Tonight might provide one of those moments in political history where you will remember where you were when. Voting has been underway for an hour and closes at 8. We'll bring you the result live at 9 and then dig deep into what the results actually mean. A former cabinet minister told me today he thinks there is a 10% chance Boris Johnson may lose, or if he wins narrowly, he might call an immediate general election, on the basis it should be for the British people to oust a Prime Minister, not a bunch of bitter MPs. Andrew Marr and Ben Kentish will be with me for the next 3 hours and we'll be taking your calls too. 0345 6060 973. Hold tight, it could be a bumpy ride.
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom at 7 o'clock, Conservative MPs are voting on Boris Johnson's future as Prime Minister. He needs 180 backbenchers to support him in order to survive a confidence vote and stay in office. Former Brexit Secretary David Davis has made a speech in the Commons calling for the Prime Minister to resign, but he told Tonight with Andrew Marr he has no idea which way the vote will go.
Anybody who tells you they know the outcome is fibbing.
Indeed, of course.
I mean, the truth is there are probably about 10 segments of the party, 10 different leadership candidacies and so on. All of it's not talking to each other, so it's incredibly chaotic. Frankly, the most chaotic situation in the party I've ever seen.
The Prime Minister faced Tory MPs earlier to try to rally support ahead of the ballot this evening. It's understood he reminded them of his electoral success and told them the party is an incredible force when united. When asked about the findings of the Sue Gray report into lockdown breaches in Downing Street, it's understood Boris Johnson said, "I'd do it again." LBC's Westminster editor Ben Kentish has been talking to party staff.
They say that what he was talking about specifically when he said, "I do it again," was thanking staff. I'm told he also said he didn't believe the fixed penalty notice that he received was warranted, that he didn't understand it when you looked at the circumstances in which it came.
Voting is due to conclude in an hour's time, with the result expected at 9 p.m. Conservative MP for Wellingborough and Rushton, Peter Bone, has told LBC he's behind the Prime Minister.
I think he's got all the big calls right. I think he's the only man to lead the Conservative Party into the next general election. We're in 2 years away, I guess, from that. And I think he's, whether it was over Brexit, the vaccination, furlough, dealing with the illegal migrants, I think the Prime Minister has shown great leadership on all those things.
Also this evening, thousands of British families are still struggling to get home after the half-term break following yet more flight cancellations. BA, EasyJet, TUI and Wizz Air have all grounded flights today, causing long queues at some airports. Commuters in London are facing nightmare journeys home due to a strike on the Underground. Members of the RMT union are walking out for 24 hours in a row over jobs and pensions. LBC's Emma Core is at Waterloo.
Queues for buses and taxis have only grown here at Waterloo. Hundreds of people are gathering in waves, waiting to squeeze onto a bus as the shutters at the entrance to the tube here remain tightly shut and will do until tomorrow morning.
Industrial action is due to end at 8 a.m. tomorrow. The cost of petrol has been described as frightening by the RAC after it rose to another record high. Filling up a family-sized car with unleaded is now costing around £98, and for a diesel car it's around £102. It says the price of fuel will continue to rise for some time to come. And Elon Musk is threatening to end his bid to buy Twitter again. The billionaire's accused the company of refusing to give him information about how many fake accounts are on the site. In the city, the FTSE 100 has closed up 75 points at 76.08. The pound buys $1.25 and €1.17. LBC weather, clear spells for much of the UK tonight. Some rain for northeastern England and the far south, a low of 4. Mostly dry for northern and southern areas tomorrow. Central areas will be mostly cloudy with the odd shower possible, a high of 21 degrees. From Global's newsroom for LBC, I'm Amelia Cox.
This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation with Iain Dale.
Hello, a very good evening to you. It's 7:04 on LBC. You're listening to, or hopefully watching, Iain Dale. I'm here with you until 10. I have Andrew Marr with me, sitting alongside me for the next 3 hours. Ben Kentish is going to be, well, he is in Westminster for us throughout the next 3 hours. And what a momentous day it could prove to be. This could be one of those days where you remember where you were when. Now, I'm not saying that Boris Johnson is necessarily going to lose this vote of confidence tonight, but there is a possibility that he might. I've noticed throughout the day there's been a conspicuous absence of a lot of ministers coming to Boris Johnson's aid. There doesn't seem to be any kind of normal whipping operation that is trying to get MPs in line to vote for the Prime Minister. So I wonder whether this vote is going to be a little bit closer than some people are thinking. Odds are that he will win it. But the margin of victory is really important. And that's something that we're going to talk about a lot over the next couple of hours. And indeed, in the 9 o'clock hour. We are expecting the result at 9 o'clock. And we'll bring it to you live from, I don't know which committee room it is in the House of Commons, but Sir Graham Brady, the chairman of the 1922 committee, my former researcher about 25 years ago, by the way. We'll talk about that a little bit with Andrew in a moment. But Andrew, before we bring you in, let's cross live to Westminster. Ben Kentish, our Westminster editor, has been there for most of the day. I know you've just seen, in the last half an hour, Theresa May has been voting in her stiletto shoes and a ball gown. Any other notable people voting over the past few minutes?
Rishi Sunak went in about 20 minutes ago, Ian. He was laughing and joking away just in front of Theresa May, as you say, in a very sparkly navy ball gown. She was obviously off to some sort of event, but it did prompt a few quips, as you might expect. You've even dressed up for the occasion, former Prime Minister, said one person. She too seemed very relaxed and in good spirits. Thankful, I would have thought, Ian, that it's not her this time round. Now, of course, when it was her, she got through the vote. She saw it off. 2/3 of her MPs or so backed her. If Boris Johnson gets that sort of margin tonight, he will be a pretty happy man, because there are all sorts of suggestions tonight that it could be, Ian, much, much closer than that. The big question then, of course, is, well, what happens? Those close to Boris Johnson say, look, a win is a win. One source saying it's like rugby or football. If you win 1-0, it might not be perfect, but you still win. That's how Number 10 are seeing it. But I was talking to one MP, one rebel in the last few minutes, and they said, look, that Boris Johnson could win. He could win reasonably comfortably, but he would have to bring the party together. And when I asked, look, can he do that? Can he carry on? They said the only way he leaves that building is in handcuffs, or if he's dragged out of it. So there's no uncertainty at all about the fact that if he wins by even a wafer-thin margin, Boris Johnson will try to continue. There is more uncertainty tonight, Ian, about whether his MPs will let him, about whether, even if he gets through tonight in the coming days and weeks, ultimately the fact that this party is clearly divided and that almost certainly upwards of 100 of his MPs will vote against him, possibly quite a lot more than that, will make things very, very difficult for him in the coming weeks and months, even if he does win the vote tonight.
Ben, thank you very much. I should have said you can watch the whole 3 hours on Global Player or on the LBC YouTube channel, which you can, if you have a smart TV, you can actually watch us on your normal television. Andrew Marr, it's going to be, I think, quite an interesting evening. What is your... I mean, come on, let's put your cards on the table. What's your prediction for what's going to happen tonight?
I think 150 rebels. And I think that because first thing this morning, I was talking to Number 10 people, or people close to Boris Johnson, I should say, who said we can keep them below 100. That's really important. At that point, I was talking to another person who was organising the anti-Boris Johnson vote. I don't think there is a single organiser, by the way. There are lots of people. Who was saying it'll be anywhere in the range between 115 and 145. And I think with the resignation of another PPS in the last 20 minutes or so, and the conspicuous lack of, as you were saying, ministers and others coming out to support Boris Johnson, I think at the moment it just feels, the pricking of my thumbs, it feels a little bit worse than it did for him this morning.
And apparently the Prime Minister didn't do himself any favours at the 1922 committee
Absolutely
earlier.
Extraordinary.
Completely. If I had been an MP wavering as to what to do, I think from what I hear of what he said, that would have tipped me over the edge.
Absolutely. Well, he said he'd do it again when he was asked about Partygate. Number 10 are now briefing that what he meant by that was he would do it again in terms of apologising and thanking staff at Number 10. That was not the impression that he gave in the 22. And, of course, this has happened before. Last time he was contrite and apologetic in public and went into the 22 and was kind of cheerful and vainglorious. It didn't work for him very well then. I don't think it will work very well tonight.
Now, we're quite keen to hear from you as well over the course of the next 3 hours. A lot of you will have views on what should happen to the Prime Minister. Certainly on my Twitter feed, I notice a lot of Conservative Party activists, their support seems to be solidifying, although you look at the Conservative Home poll, which shows that 55% of Conservative members actually want the Prime Minister gone. Well, Andrew Mitchell joins us now. Andrew, you were a former Chief Whip, but you made clear in the House of Commons a few weeks ago that you could not support the Prime Minister. Now, if you were still Chief Whip now, what would you be doing?
Well, of course, the whips don't take a part in these sort of elections. Their job is always to make sure the government gets its business through. But when it's a leadership election and the question of the future of the leader is involved, the whips play no part in that by tradition.
Really?
Absolutely. By tradition, they play no part. There's a sort of shadow whipping operation going on, which, as it were, if there are one or two whips involved in that, they sort of take off their whip hat to do it. But for the whips, the official position in a leadership election is that they organise the mechanics, but they don't interfere. And indeed, if they did, it could well be counterproductive.
So what's your feeling as to what will happen tonight?
Well, I think Andy, with his long political heritage, is probably pretty accurate. I think he's slightly high, I would have thought, but we're splitting hairs.
140, 145, you think?
Well, I think it's slightly high, but we're splitting hairs because if it's over 100, he's in deep trouble, and if it's over 120 or 130, then I think the game is over.
Well, Theresa May got 63% in that confidence vote in 2018. Now, if Boris Johnson got 60%, he would get 215 votes and the Rebels would get 145. And in the end, this is a numbers game. I mean, he could argue if he wins by one, that's enough. But in reality, it's not, is it?
Well, we've seen all this before. We saw it with Mrs. Thatcher, who won the vote. We saw it with John Major. And we saw it with Mrs. May. And, of course, in a democracy, winning by one vote means you win. But this is about confidence. This is about confidence. And, therefore, winning by one vote or by 10 votes is not enough to sustain confidence that Boris is the right man to lead the country with these very difficult circumstances we now have, particularly with the cost of living. He's not the right man to lead the country. And also, he would not be the right person to lead us into the next election. So it's about confidence. And my colleagues will be making up their minds and voting as to whether they think he's the right man to tackle these problems and the right man to lead us into the next election.
Could I ask about the timing of this, Andrew? Because I know some of your colleagues who want Boris Johnson out, frankly, think that the rebels, if we can call it that, have bogged up significantly by bringing this forward now. And actually they should have waited until after the by-elections. Tiverton and Wakefield almost certainly going to go quite badly for the Conservatives. And then there's the Privileges Committee as well. And that, as it were, this is a premature coup.
But you see, it's not organised in that way. There's been no coordination. I mean, I think the point you make is a good one. I never put in any letter of no confidence to Sir Graham. Well, I'd said it in the House of Commons on the 31st of January, as you just mentioned. I've made my position clear. My constituency officers actually made their position clear sometime before that. And I just didn't feel the need to put in a letter. And had it not
that is the only way to get rid of a leader who you have no confidence in. I don't understand that. David Davis didn't either.
I thought I'd done my bit, making it clear publicly, so no one was in any doubt where I stood.
But also,
and I might well have written a letter in due course.
To jump in, you were also waiting for the most lethal moment, weren't you? Which is not yet.
I think there's probably some truth in that, but anyway, I didn't put in a letter, and I think a number of people made it clear who think Boris should go that they didn't necessarily think now was the right moment to do it, but that's what my colleagues have decided. Now is the right moment, and it's up to everybody to make up their mind now where they stand.
What do you make of these MPs today who've suddenly got the courage of their convictions and come out and said, yes, I'm not going to vote for him? And wouldn't the courageous thing have been to actually say it before now? It doesn't. I think it's a bit sort of weak of somebody to do it now, isn't it?
No, I think that's an unfair criticism, unusually, if I may say so, Iain, because today is the day where people are being asked to decide, and some of my colleagues have waited. They've been talking to their constituents over the Jubilee weekend. They've waited till, the rubber hits the road, which is the vote today, and they've decided today what they're going to do. So I think that's not a fair criticism of them.
Were you in the 22 committee?
I wasn't, no.
Oh, I won't ask you the next question then. Caroline Dinage, one of your colleagues, she's polling her constituents before deciding how to vote. I mean, how pathetic is that? Surely the role of an MP is to provide some leadership, and she knows the Prime Minister better than any of her constituents will. Is that really the way that an MP should behave in these circumstances?
Well, I wouldn't dream of criticising Caroline. We all go about it in our own way. We all consult our constituents in the way we think is best. But then, as you rightly say, we make up our own mind. But if she wants to poll her constituents and see where they stand, I have no criticism of that.
How boring. We'll have more from Andrew Mitchell in just a moment, and of course more from Andrew Marr, who will be with me right through the whole programme, analysing the result when we get it at 9 o'clock. And don't forget, you can watch us on YouTube, on the LBC YouTube channel, and on Global Player. Ben Kentish will bring us more from the House of Commons in just a few moments' time. You're listening to or watching LBC. It's 7:15.
This is LBC. This is LBC with Iain Dale. Call 0345 6060 973.
17 minutes past 7 on LBC. Paul Brand from ITN is reporting that the Prime Minister has just gone into the 1922 committee to vote, and that the former Scottish Secretary, David Mundell, has said he voted against the Prime Minister, quotes, after a difficult couple of years and listening to the views of my constituents, I voted tonight for a fresh start, a new leadership for our country. Now, obviously, David Mundell, not necessarily a fan of the Prime Minister, Andrew Mitchell, given that he was, I think, removed from his position by Boris Johnson. Of course, that is the problem, isn't it, for a leader? When you've been in government for 12 years, or even in Boris Johnson's case for 2.5 years, you start to build up enemies on the backbenchers, people who've been sacked, people who haven't been promoted when they think they should be promoted, and people who just don't like the way the Prime Minister behaves.
Well, I think David Mundell is a very respected and senior Tory of a sort of centrist nature. I think what he is saying tonight is important. I don't think he's made this clear before. I think he's reached an opinion over the weekend and today, and I think it's significant that he's made the decision that he has.
Are there people who speak out and maybe don't put in letters, but because they've spoken out, they give a lead that almost gives others a licence to put in a letter.
That may be the case. I mean, you mentioned earlier that David hadn't put in a letter. He's certainly spoken out, David Davis, and I reached the same conclusion. But as Andy said when he zeroed in on the point, I probably would have written a letter at some point had the ballot not been taking place today.
Let's talk a little bit about numbers, because I've got a little list here where I've got, if Boris Johnson gets 75% of the votes, which would be 269, and there'd be 98 voting against him, I think that would, in a sense, be a triumph for him, wouldn't it? And it would quell a lot of the leadership
number
speculation.
of rebels. These are very strange numbers, because we're talking with no knowledge at all. And when the vote comes out, we will all look at it and we will make an instant snap decision. And weirdly, we'll all probably come to roughly the same conclusion about what it means. But I think that if the numbers of rebels are above 100, he's in trouble. If they're below 100, therefore, it's easier for him. Though that's still an awful lot of Tory MPs who voted against him, but it's much easier. The way I look at it, I mean, I always follow Jacob Rees-Mogg in all matters, of course. And he said, I remember when Theresa May was in the same kind of trouble, that what you had to do was you subtracted the payroll vote, the ministers and the rest of them, from the total of MPs. And then if you didn't get more than half of those remaining, the non-payroll vote, then you lost. Effectively, that was what he said, I think, when Theresa. Somehow he seems to have lost that piece of wisdom between now and then. But if you did that, you'd take away, how many payroll? About 170, something like that, from the sort of 360. So forth. You're left with, roughly speaking, 200. Round figures, non-payroll vote. So if there are 100 rebels, then more than half of those who are completely free to express their minds and aren't part of Boris Johnson's government have chosen against him, and he has lost more than half of, as it were, the Free Party. I think that's quite a big...
I think, in a way, the key figure is 60% of the parliamentary parties. I think Theresa May got 63%, but she was still out the next year. Now, if he gets 60%, that's 215 MPs supporting him. But if it goes much under that, I mean, say it was 52-48, like the Brexit referendum was. I mean, 186 to 173. What would happen in those circumstances?
I think he is holed below the waterline, to use a cliche. I think there's blood in the water, to use another cliche. I think it's very, very hard for him.
Go for a hat-trick.
I'm running out of cliches here. It's really, really bad for him, all right? It's really bad. Because, he has to carry on and function as a Conservative Prime Minister, and that means he has to command a large number of Conservative MPs to go in that direction or that direction or that direction or whatever. And if they're not behind him, then he hasn't really got a majority. I've been looking back. I was thinking, in some respects, the mood of the moment is a bit like 1978. In 1978, we all knew a change was coming. We knew that the government of the day, there's some sort of consensual position that the Callaghan's government represented that was unable to grapple with the huge headwinds and problems the country faced, and they were running out of options and they were running out of philosophy. And in some respects, I fear that we are in the same sort of position, that the Conservatives are really struggling with these immense economic and other challenges to the unity of the UK, and they're running out of ideas, and that we're in that same kind of territory.
Isn't it funny how politics is so cyclical? Sort of every 40 years, things tend to come round again, don't they? Inflation is back. We had a sort of hard-left Labour leader.
To be fair, unemployment was much, much higher than it is now. But, sorry, can I just follow that for 1 millisecond, then I'll shut up, which was the big difference from 1978. Callaghan had no parliamentary majority. What I was going to suggest is, after a vote of the kind that you're discussing, question mark, does Boris Johnson really have a parliamentary majority? But the other big change, of course, was then there was Margaret Thatcher waiting in the wings. It was a big, very, very carefully thought through and aggressive opposition policy to reverse the problems. And I have to say, with the greatest respect to Keir Starmer, now I don't think there is.
We'll come to a call in a second, but just before we do, Andrew Mitchell, if it was 186-173, what are the consequences of that?
That is game over without any question whatsoever. But I think the 100 may well be the magic figure, as you suggested. If there's below 100 people who want Boris to go, I think he can face down that opposition. Although, of course, it is still a huge amount if it's sort of just under 100. I think over 100, he's in very choppy water. And if you start to get up to the sort of figures that Andy was suggesting, then I think, it's touch and go whether he can continue. And it's not really about about the numbers. It's about confidence. It's about whether or not the parliamentary party, the party in the country, have confidence that this is the right man to lead us into the next election.
They have shown confidence. I mean, I've got 186 votes for me and 173 against, so I ain't going anywhere.
No, but we've been around this track before, that Mrs Thatcher and John Major and Mrs May. Mrs May wasn't going anywhere, but then because confidence had drained away, that was the fact that she'd numerically won the ballot was not enough. And that will be the case today. If Boris doesn't win convincingly, then his authority will seep away because people will know that so many of those behind him on the government benches don't want him there.
And if it was like that, would you then call on him to fall on his sword for the benefit not just of the party but for the country too?
Well, I think he and we have to work out what is in the best interest of the country and of the party. And I hope very much that when we see the figures, if we are in that sort of territory, that Boris will take a very responsible attitude to doing just that.
Right, let's go to a call. Raveen is in Croydon. Hello, Raveen.
Hello, Iain. Hello, Andrew, and the two Andrews. The grease piglet has been caught, put on a spit, and he's being roasted. It may be a slow roast because he's mostly going to win the vote tonight, but he is done.
See, Andrew and I were just thinking, why didn't we think of that one?
And the thing is, it's not a surprise. You know, when he won the election with the 80-seat majority, yeah? Because I remember when he won the leadership and Max Hastings wrote a coruscating article in The Guardian about him. And I know, obviously, I love listening to you, Andrew, and also Iain, but also James O'Brien, for years was going on about him. It was like, he was seen as king of all he surveys. But he has spaffed, and that's using his terminology, an 80-seat majority. Yeah, because of it, not just because his lies, which everybody knew about, and you can say it was being priced in, but his incompetence, his absolute incompetence. And I think the issue is, it's been mentioned before on Andrew's show earlier, when the lies was one thing. The doing the parties or the drinking was one thing, but it was the lies. And even today, when he says, I would do just the same, shows that he literally believes thing to say, wasn't it? Yeah. That he literally believes that the law does not,
apply to him.
Apply to him, and he's done. And I would like, if tomorrow he's going to win the vote, he will win the vote. When he wins the vote...
Can I just jump in about that majority, however? It was a very big majority, but you have to remember two things. One, that he was fighting Jeremy Corbyn, and second, it came after a period where, under Theresa May, the entire political system of this country had been in interminable, really boring deadlock for a very long time over Brexit. And he was the guy, that story about cutting the Gordian knot. It's a great big, thick tangle of rope. No one can undo it. Someone comes along and cuts it. And effectively, taking on the Supreme Court and all the rest, if he cut it. And that, I think, was his big secret. He was the guy who could unblock what seemed like a constipated, infuriating period in British politics.
That's why I supported him.
Well, there we are.
I always thought that we got it the wrong way around. It should have been Boris who was Prime Minister in 2016, followed by Mrs May, because we needed to have a Brexiteer to implement Brexit. And once the country had spoken, it was clear it was going to go through, and we needed a Brexiteer leader who would command confidence.
Do you feel he's let you down?
No, I think the party should give him enormous credit for what he did over Brexit. He got Brexit through, and as Andy was saying, the country was having a nervous breakdown.
Apart from the Northern Ireland Protocol, of course.
Well, that is a separate issue, but he got the deal through, and that was very important. If you think back to what was going on at the time.
But the fact that you voted for him in 2020, whenever it was, 19, and now you're calling on him to go, you clearly feel he's let you down.
Well, I think that it was great what he did for us as a party over Brexit, but I think as you look forward and you ask yourself the question, is he the right person to tackle these problems and lead us into the next election? I'm afraid my answer, as I have made clear very publicly, is he isn't.
Andrew, thank you very much for coming in. Time for our business roundup now with Andy Sylvester, editor of City AM. Andy, very good evening to you. Now, a gas firm says they'll spend their way out of the windfall tax. That sounds a bit ominous.
Evening, Ian. Not too ominous. What we're actually seeing is what Rishi Sunak wanted to happen, which is that a company, Serica Energy, it produces about 5% of the UK's natural gas, come out today and said, although we are well and truly in the crosshairs of the windfall tax or the temporary targeted energy levy or whatever it was called, so that Labour couldn't claim too much credit, they will spend and invest in the UK, which will allow them to write off that cost against their windfall tax bill. The windfall tax is not necessarily a windfall tax in the sense of a huge tax raid. What it is essentially a demand to British companies that they'll get hit with a huge tax bill unless they invest. And we're starting to see the fruits of that. Whether that is the right or wrong thing and why the government should be doing such things, we can park for a philosophical debate another day. There's quite enough of those around today.
Now, Apple are to enter the buy now, pay later space.
Yeah, it is the market that everybody wants to get into. This is the one pioneered by Klarna, Afterpay, known as ClearPay in this country, that allows you to buy clothes or whatever it might be in a certain number of installments. Anyway, Apple certainly becoming the biggest player in that market today. An announcement in the States within the last couple of hours suggesting that they'll be moving into that on people's iPhones, making it far easier to pay for pretty much anywhere that takes Apple Pay, and having that in a series of installments. There will be criticism because buy now, pay later is introducing high levels of debt to huge numbers of people. We're not talking about the Wongas of the world, but there are regulators and there are campaigners that are deeply concerned, and Apple muscling into the market will make it far more of a mainstream way to buy and purchase goods. Again, there's a debate to be had about whether or not that's better than credit cards charging APR, but again, we'll park that for another day. There's plenty to be talking about.
Andy, thank you very much. That's Andy Sylvester from City AM.
LBC Business Update.
With Direct Line Landlord Insurance. Get multi-property insurance.
Couple of texts here. Joe in Norfolk says, Ian, if Boris loses the vote, I will never bother with politics again. I like him a lot. We'll address that in the next half an hour. And Alan in what he calls True Blue Reigate says, please pass it on to every MP in a safe seat. They should vote Johnson out as they will get back in without him. And every MP in an unsafe seat should vote Johnson out as they will be gone with him still there. Well, lots of issues to talk about. We'll come to more of your calls as well. We spent the past half an hour with one of the PM's critics. Next, we'll be joined by one of his supporters. You're listening to LBC. I'm Iain Dale. It's 7:31 and Amelia Cox has the news headlines.
Conservative MPs are voting to decide Boris Johnson's future as Prime Minister. At least 180 backbenchers need to stand by him in order for him to survive the confidence vote and stay on. Speaking to Tory MPs earlier, Boris Johnson is understood to have reminded them about his electoral success. Asked about Sue Gray's report into lockdown breaches in Downing Street, he said, I'd do it again. And police in Birmingham are investigating the death of a 2-year-old baby girl. Officers were called to a flat in Bartley Green on April the 13th. LBC weather, clear spells for much of the UK tonight. Some rain for northeastern England and the far south, a low of 4 degrees.
LBC.
If
Iain Dale on LBC. Text 84850.
7:35 on LBC. If you've just tuned in, just a reminder that we're expecting the result from the 1922 committee. It'll be carried live. Graham Brady will announce it at 9 o'clock on the dot. Now, they say it will be at 9 o'clock on the dot, but you've listened to enough of these evenings with me before to know that often there's some sort of delay. But I don't see how it can take more than an hour to count 359 votes. But I suppose it could be very tight. Who knows? Richard Holden joins us, Conservative MP for North West Durham. Richard, you are backing the Prime Minister. Now, North West Durham, it's one of these classic red wall seats, went Conservative for the first time in 2019. You've clearly made a calculation that sticking with Boris Johnson means that you're more likely to hold your seat. I guess there are other reasons as well, but that must be one of the primary ones.
I think that's the ultimate reason, really. I've been out... I did about 15 events over the weekend, Platinum Jubilee street parties and various different
tell
things.
Me you were talking about the Prime Minister.
Well, some people would come up to you, interestingly, and volunteer their thoughts. And I just say that there was obviously a difference of opinion among some people, but I think overall what people were really saying was that they've had enough of talking about this. They want to move on. They want to talk about the big issues which are affecting them. They voted for the Conservative Party at the last general election to deal with Brexit and to really change their local communities for good and to start delivering some of that levelling up agenda. And there was definitely a vote against Jeremy Corbyn as well as part of that. But I think that's what they want to focus on. They see it through a bigger prism. And I think there is a wisdom in the electorate, and that's what they want to focus on. I really do think that a lot of this is pretty Westminster tittle-tattle stuff, if I'm totally honest.
Well, that's not what the polling says, is it, Richard? I mean, the polling is pretty devastating, and not just among the general electorate. If you look at the Conservative Home polling, and that's a big panel, really big panel, and they were very, very pro-Boris Johnson at the time of the election, moves away a little bit at the early days of Partygate, moves a bit further. Sue Gray now, I think 56% say that he should go tonight. I mean, it's really pretty devastating, and that's your own people.
Yeah, no, I can only speak for the people of North West Durham I've been speaking to over the last few days, but I think there is a general feeling that people want the government to be concentrating, and the Conservative Party in government, to be concentrating on the big issues, and that is not the leadership of the Conservative Party at the moment. I don't think they want Conservative MPs like me to bang on about this rather than dealing with the issues which actually affect them and their everyday lives.
Richard, could I just swivel this around and ask you, if Boris Johnson suddenly did have to go tonight, whether you think there is anybody else in the Conservative Party who could unite it?
I'm not sure about that. I think we'd have to see in that sort of contest.
Possibly.
But I'm sure there is always somebody who's going to be able to unite the party in the country. But I think the best option is the Prime Minister, and that's why I've been backing him today. And genuinely, from my constituents I've spoken to over the last few days in the constituency, there is a real feeling that what they want is the government, all parts of the government, to be focusing on delivering for them and not to be talking about very Westminster-focused politics.
But is that possible when you've got the Standards and Privileges Committee carrying out its own investigation into Partygate? That probably won't report until October, so this might keep on going right till October, and it will be very difficult for the government to really grab back the agenda.
No, I think there is an option to grab back the agenda. I mean, one of the things that a few people in my mailbox have been in touch about is, wanting to buy their first home or wanting to buy their council home. That's something the Prime Minister's talked about, and hopefully going to see a bigger announcement on later this week. I think you're absolutely right, the Standards and Privileges Committee going on, but that's happening in October. I think, down the line, there is obviously moments when this needs to be discussed, but at the moment, when they're seeing petrol prices going up and up and up, they're seeing their fuel bill starting to come in. Yes, the Chancellor has provided support on that, but that's what they're really concerned by. That's what's coming into my casework inbox, and that's what I'm concerned about, because those people are, that's what bothers my constituents more than anything else.
But do you think, an alternative Conservative leader, and we will hear the names, Tom Tugendhat or Jeremy Hunt or whoever, would not address those concerns? Because the other side of the Conservative Party argument tonight would say, actually, there are lots of other people out there who don't have this background, haven't had all these problems, and they would also roll up their sleeves and deal with the cost of living crisis.
Obviously, all Conservative MPs are concerned about those broader issues, but what's top of my priority list is to deal with all of that stuff, because that's the absolute top. And I would also say that, in North West Durham, voted for Brexit. They want to see, they've seen that delivered. That's one of the reasons they voted for him in the first place. They also didn't want to see left-wing Labour Party, Starmer and the previous MP, Laura Pidcock, were there wanting to have that second referendum. They don't want to see him there. I want the best person to lead the country out of this, and I really do think that the Prime Minister and the Chancellor have come forward with a sensible plan, and I want to see them given the opportunity to deliver that.
Well, let's bring in Caroline Slowcock into the conversation, Director of the Civil Exchange think tank. Now, she was Private Secretary to Margaret Thatcher during the end of her time as Prime Minister, and of course Margaret Thatcher was the last Prime Minister to be outed after a no-confidence vote, even though she won it. And I published Caroline's memoirs of this period, a really good book it is to people like us. Yeah. Caroline, welcome. When you sort of look at the events of the last few weeks, are there any parallels to be drawn between what's happening to Boris Johnson now and what happened to Margaret Thatcher in 1990?
Yes, I think there are. I think, I recognise that sort of feeling of complacency that I was experiencing when I was inside Number 10, working closely with Margaret Thatcher as a civil servant, that sense of being in a bubble and being out of touch. I remember going, when I went, back to where I lived in Stoke Newington, it was just a kind of totally different, thing going on out there about how they saw her and how we saw how she was seen by those who were closest to her politically. And I think this government is looking out of touch. Certainly if you look at the opinion polls. I think that also another lesson that you get from the kind of last days of Thatcher was that although she won, she lost. She won the majority. She was only a few votes off winning, not having to go to a second round. But the truth is that you are mortally wounded if a certain proportion of the party can't support you. I think the last thing I'd like to say is that actually there's something very different going on here. Do you remember that Margaret Thatcher had two of these challenges, one a year before she was finally ousted? It was about the poll tax in Europe and who was advising her. But this, and she survived that, but she didn't survive it in the end. It was a long, painful process, but she was finally, she had to go. But, it was about policy. Whereas this is about the character of the man. And it is actually really a constitutional issue about when people lie, when people break the rules that they set for other people, then there has to be a penalty to pay. And actually it's down to the Conservative Party and the MPs in particular to administer this penalty. And if they don't, then I think that there will be, he'll come a cropper, if you like, either through some other events over the coming months and years or at the next election. She was a woman with who had integrity, honesty. I didn't vote for her. I was a civil servant working for her. I didn't share a lot of her political thinking at all. But I always trusted her word, and she respected Parliament. She would never have lied to it. And she would never have allowed what happened to have happened in Number 10. It's just inconceivable. So I think they're very different personalities, but I think it's not a good thing to face a confidence vote from your own MPs who say, you are not fit to be Prime Minister. This will not be forgotten when it comes to the next election.
Richard Holden, that's an interesting point, isn't it? Because Margaret Thatcher, even her detractors would have, I think, described her as an honourable person, somebody that you could maybe trust even if you didn't believe her. Now, the problem now is that Boris Johnson has lost the trust of so many people, not just some of his MPs, but also a lot of the electorate. I hear it every day through the phone calls that come into this station. It's very difficult to regain that trust once you've lost it, isn't it?
I think it's always difficult for any Prime Minister after their first flush of office to...
it's only been 2.5 years.
To maintain the popularity rating that they had. But I would just want to take one issue with what Caroline was saying, which is this idea of him lying to Parliament. What has been very clear is that there is a proper look into this by the Standards Committee at the moment. I believe the Prime Minister when he says he did not know the extent of what had happened when
Lord Geidt doesn't believe him, does he?
Well, there's a reason there's investigation happening at the moment, and I think we should let that happen. I think to take...
How many more investigations can we have? Well, you can't keep delaying it and delaying it. At some point, this boiler's got to be lanced.
Well, I think that's exactly what this investigation is to do. And I think if you look at the Sue Gray report and the conclusions, that's not the conclusion that she comes to. And I think that's very clear. And I think Sue Gray also, when you look at that report, does actually praise some of the changes that he's already made in Downing Street.
Sorry to jump in. I can completely understand, in a building as big as Downing Street, with probably fairly good sound insulation, why Boris Johnson might not have heard some of the parties going on. What I really can't understand is why, when this story bubbled out, he never turned to anyone, all those people he was working with so closely, all those people in charge, and asked them what had happened. I just don't get it.
Caroline, I saw you shaking your head when Richard was speaking there on a couple of points. Do you just want to elaborate the shakes?
Well, I mean, first of all, Sue Gray said that there was a failure of political and official leadership. Secondly, it's true that Number 10 is quite a big place. There are parties that he wasn't at, that he wouldn't have heard. But he set the culture. And if you go into a room where you haven't been working all day and raise a glass to your colleagues at the time when you're telling everyone else it's not safe to mix socially, it's not safe to say goodbye to the people that you love when they're dying, and you can't see that that's a party and you can't see that you're breaking your own rules, it's a failure of judgment if he didn't see that. But I think he must have seen it, and therefore he did lie to Parliament.
Caroline, thank you very much indeed for joining us. That's Caroline Slowcock, Director of the Civil Exchange think tank. Her book is called People Like Us. It's all about her years working for Margaret Thatcher in Downing Street. Richard, Dehenna Davison has voted against the Prime Minister this evening. Now, her constituency, is it next to yours? It's not far away,
It's
is
right
it?
next to mine. It's all along my southern border, yeah.
I mean, are you surprised by that? Have you discussed it with her?
I haven't discussed it with her in the last few days. But I'm disappointed that she's voted against the Prime Minister.
Because, I mean, she is somebody who you would have thought would have been a rock-solid supporter of the Prime Minister.
That's for Dehenna to explain, and her decisions for doing so. I think, she's in a quite different seat to me, but, she's entitled to her own view and her own decisions, and I've not seen that.
OK, well, it's being reported at the moment. Right, more from Andrew Marr and Richard Holden in just a moment, and we'll be taking some more of your calls. You're listening to LBC. Hopefully you're watching us on Global Player or the LBC YouTube channel. It's 7:47.
LBC, Nick Ferrari at breakfast.
Sir Roger Gale, Conservative MP for North Thanet.
I submitted my letter 18 months ago after the Barnard Castle affair.
Over the last 18 months, many of his allies, Sir Roger, would point to issues such as the Ukraine, but that's not coloured your thinking.
I absolutely agree. Mr. Johnson and the government, of course, have done everything they possibly can to assist Ukraine. That said, unfortunately, there have been so many other instances of things that have gone wrong. I think the time has come when we have to say that the party is divided. Mr. Johnson said himself, divided parties don't win elections. We have to have a new leader to take us through that.
Follow the fallout of the Prime Minister confidence vote with a Nick Ferrari at breakfast special tomorrow morning from 6, only on LBC. Iain Dale on LBC.
It's 7:51 on LBC. It's Iain Dale with Andrew Marr, and we have Richard Holden, the Conservative MP for North West Durham, with us, who's backing the Prime Minister. Diana Davison, the MP for Bishop Auckland, thank you very much. She's just issued a statement saying, many of you have understandably asked how I intended to vote in this evening's confidence ballot in the Prime Minister. Though it's a secret ballot, it feels right to share with you how I voted. This is not a decision I took lightly. I listened carefully to all sides, and particularly to the many constituents who contacted me, sharing their thoughts and experiences. Weighing it all up, I voted against the Prime Minister tonight. I hope that whatever the result, we politicians can now fully focus on the things we were elected to do for you, and that is why I won't be commenting further on this now. Doesn't really tell us why she voted against, does it?
Well, I've been texting her while we
Have
did
you?
the break, and she has apologised for doing it while I was on air, because she didn't know I was here. Because we're actually quite good friends, Adina and I.
Not that good, it seems.
And I think one of the issues she's mentioned to me in the text was she had voted against the government on the tax policy previously around national insurance being raised, and that's one of the things which has sort of I think she sort of said tipped her over the edge. And she wants some more focus on that. I think Tina and I probably both agree on that more broadly, but we want to see a direction of travel on that. But I think we've taken a different approach, and I particularly want to see that NHS waiting list as a priority reduced. But we've obviously taken a slightly different approach.
Right. Well, let's see what Eileen in Glasgow thinks. Eileen, very good evening. What would you like to say?
Good evening. I have 2 points. The first being about people like Richard who are supporting the Prime Minister. I am flabbergasted. And to talk about looking through prisms, I suggest an ethical prism would probably be most helpful. The second, and I feel more important, is the emotional battering people in the country are taking. Let me explain. The cost of living, the late support. By that point, families up and down the country have gone through the stress of looking in their fridge, looking in their bank account, not seeing very much, and then they're handed crumbs off the master's table.
Well, to be fair, there was some quite big crumbs in that statement last week, or the week before, weren't there? I mean, £15 billion worth.
Ian. They were pushed and embarrassed into it, to be fair. The other side of the battering I'm talking about is the emotional battering the country's taken. Every time another piece of scandal, another lie is exposed, the country are then, it opens up for me personally, and I know from other people I've speaking to, it opens up a wound where the country has been damaged by the lies, by the deceit, and being patronised, quite frankly. Every time that we're disregarded, I felt so strongly in February. I sat in my kitchen, and I'll be quite honest, I was in tears, listening to the partying, listening to Allegra Strachan and all the rest of it. It was just horrible. And I'm thinking there was people up and down the country the same, taking an emotional battering. Every time they're disregarded or patronised, treated with sheer contempt at each scandal. And to be told, I've just got on with it. I don't get it. What's bigger in politics and life than trust?
Let's ask Richard Holden. I mean, Richard, how do you respond to Eileen? Because she's clearly quite distressed about what's going on.
Look, I don't think anybody could consider that the government has been embarrassed into anything. There was a massive package earlier in the year, £150 for every Band A to D property. That covered 95% of my constituency. We're seeing a massive package of support for people, particularly those who are less well off and pensioners. £850 for every pensioner household, over £1,200 for those of my constituency who are on universal credit, £400 for every household in the country. £37 billion worth of support going out here.
But Eileen's not hearing that.
Well, those are the facts and those are the figures, and that's what's actually going into people's bank accounts over the next few months. And we've also got a significant tax cut happening next month for people in work, as well as half of that money for the people on universal credit, which is a more significant part of my constituency than many other parts of the country.
Eileen, thank you very much for that. Let's bring Joe Twyman into the conversation, co-founder of Delta Poll. Joe, I've lost count of all of the polls that I've been reading today on my Twitter feed. Just tell us what they're saying. Is there a direction of travel in these polls? Do they all seem to agree with each other?
Well, in a sense, yes, and that agreement has been going on for some time. Around 6 out of 10 people have consistently said that they think Boris Johnson should resign, and that was true when it was asked if, in principle, he were to receive a fine for Partygate. It was asked again after he had received the fine. It was asked again after Sue Gray's report, and it was asked again today. And consistently, 6 out of 10 people think that he should resign. Now, obviously, a lot of those people are not Conservative supporters, but even among Conservatives, the figure is between about a quarter and a third, depending on how you ask the question. So it's clear that he is not popular in that sense. Also, his figures for his own personal approval ratings are low and have been consistently low. He lags way behind Keir Starmer now when it comes to personal ratings. The Conservative Party more generally has struggled to close the back gap on the Conservatives, on Labour, and since the local elections, there has been very little movement in the polls, despite, for instance, the announcements around the cost of living last week.
And in terms of the Conservative Party itself, you've presumably seen the poll from Conservative Home today. I'm never quite sure how widespread or how accurate the polling base is on that, whether they're all actually Conservative Party members or not. But 55% ostensibly of Conservative Party members calling for him to go. Is that reflected elsewhere as well?
What we don't have is representative polling of Conservative Party members on this specific issue, and I'm sure that the Conservative Home poll is to some degree indicative of the people who are willing to vote on Conservative Home surveys. Yeah. And in the past they have been broadly correct in terms of the overall story. But with such a contentious issue and with so much at stake, I think you wouldn't want to call it either way on such what is relatively close outcome.
Yes, as I understand it, jumping in, that poll, you have to send in detailed evidence that you are actually a Conservative Party member before you join the panel. So that is an authentic Conservative Party group, and they've been polled over quite a period of time. And they were quite pro-Boris Johnson. Then Sue Gray happened, and it dipped. And it dipped again, and it's dipped again today. So it does seem to be significant. Can I ask you one other thing, however? Because talking to a lot of Tories who are determined to support Boris Johnson in the short term, they say, do you know what, the polling is terrible at the moment, but it'll change. People will forget all about Partygate. Life moves on. We've all got relatively short attention spans. He's a great campaigner. Just give him time. How do you respond to that?
I think to some extent that is true, but perhaps not in the way that the people saying that imagine. I think that it is likely that in a year or 2 years' time, a typical voter, might go into the voting booth and say, I'm not going to vote Conservative. Now, they're probably not going to say, I'm not going to vote Conservative because Boris Johnson had a party on this particular day and did this particular action that was pictured in this particular report. But it's far more likely that typical voter could go into the voting booth and say, I'm not going to vote Conservative because the Conservatives don't play by the rules, because the Conservatives cannot be trusted, because the Conservatives aren't honest, and they will get their cues from Boris Johnson's behaviour.
Joe, we have to leave it there.
And that cumulative effect is damaging.
Joe, thank you very much. That's Joe Twyman, co-founder of Delta Poll. Thanks to Richard Holden for joining us. Boris Johnson's fate is sealed within the next 20 seconds because voting is now about to close.
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
Leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom at 8 o'clock, voting has just closed in a secret ballot of Tory MPs on whether they have confidence in Boris Johnson as their leader. It was triggered after the chairman of the 1922 Committee of Backbenchers received more than the 54 letters needed. The Prime Minister requires 180 MPs to back him to stay on. Andrew Mitchell, the MP for Sutton Coldfield and a former Cabinet Minister, told LBC victory for the PM would not necessarily be the end of the matter.
Winning by 1 vote or by 10 votes is not enough to sustain confidence that Boris is the right man to lead the country with these very difficult circumstances we now have, particularly with the cost of living. He's not the right man to lead the country, and also he would not be the right person to lead us into the next election.
Earlier, Mr Johnson addressed his backbenchers, making his case for remaining. He told them this is not the moment for a leisurely and entirely unforced domestic political drama. The Business Secretary, Kwasi Kwarteng, says the fallout from Partygate has been an issue, but he's standing by the PM.
it bothers me what happened, and I think people are right to ask questions. But why I'm supporting him, which is what this is all about, is because of the vaccine rollout, because of Brexit, and because of the fact that the Ukrainians have said that Boris Johnson was their number one supporter internationally. These things are significant, and that's why I'm backing him.
The result is expected at 9 o'clock this evening. Stay with LBC for comprehensive reaction. Transport for London is warning commuters to expect disruption on London Underground until 8 o'clock tomorrow morning. A 24-hour walkout by thousands of members of the RMT union has left only a few services running today. These passengers at Waterloo Station say it's been a struggle.
It's probably put an extra 2 hours onto our journey each way. We're misconnecting train journeys back up to North Yorkshire.
I basically just ended up putting my trainers on and walking most of the way to work, so it sucks.
And are you going into work tomorrow morning as well?
No, I'm going to work from home tomorrow. There's no way I'm going to try and fight through all of this again.
There's been further disruption for holidaymakers trying to fly home from a half-term break. BA, EasyJet, TUI and Wizz Air all dropped a number of flights today. In the city, the FTSE 100 closed up 75 points at 76.08. The pound buys $1.25 and €1.17. LBC weather dry for most areas tonight and chilly in places. Tomorrow, sunny spells but a few showers across Wales and central and southern England, a high of 21 degrees. From Global's newsroom for LBC, I'm Andy Ivy.
This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation with Iain Dale.
Hello, a very good evening. It's 2 minutes past 8 on LBC, and we'd like to welcome listeners from LBC News as well, our sister station. I have Andrew Marr with me. We are waiting for the result of the Conservative Party no confidence vote in Boris Johnson. The polls closed, or the ballot boxes closed 3 minutes ago at 8 o'clock precisely. So the votes will now be counted within that committee room in the Houses of Parliament. We're expecting the result on the dot of 9, so you don't want to go anywhere, because we will bring it to you absolutely live on LBC and LBC News. David Lammy, my co-presenter on LBC, but for our purposes tonight, not a co-presenter. He is here in his capacity as Shadow Foreign Secretary. We'll be coming to him in just a moment. But let's cross over to the Houses of Parliament. Ben Kentish, our Westminster editor, is there. The ballot box is well and truly slammed shut, Ben.
It's like the number of MPs, Ian, heading up the staircase behind me to vote slowed to a trickle. They all got there pretty early. There were long queues in the first half an hour or so of voting. Most of them got the job done nice and early. And I've got to tell you, since then, the bars just downstairs from here have been slowly filling up, while people from all parties, lots of Labour MPs hanging around too, anticipate and await that result. We should get it, as you say, in less than an hour. Just upstairs from me, quite literally above where I'm talking to you from, Graham Brady and other members of the 1922 Executive Committee are beginning the process now of counting those votes, up to 360 votes. They will double check them, of course. There could be quite a close result, and they want to make sure everything is done absolutely perfectly, because there's no real procedure available for a recount. So they'll be starting that now, and we will, within the hour, find out, as you say, whether Boris Johnson is going to continue as Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, as leader of the Conservative Party, or not. Most people think he will, but there's a concern here, and there's a concern amongst his team. I said to one member of his team, Minister, are you confident of a comfortable result? The response, Ian, we're working hard. They don't want to predict that this will be comfortable. There's a lot of expectation management going on, but I've got to say some of the rebels think they could be looking at 120, 130, maybe even 140 or 50 MPs voting against the Prime Minister, and that would be deeply and highly damaging to Boris Johnson if those sorts of numbers vote against his leadership tonight.
Now, Andrew Marr has been loitering with intent in the corridors of power throughout the day. You've been there all day. I mean, all we can do really in this hour is to rely on our political instinct, sort of 30 years of covering these kind of elections. What is your, I mean, you're a lot younger than Andrew and I, but what are your instincts telling you about what's going on today?
Ian, I passed two cabinet ministers in the corridor behind me. One of them is vocally critical of Boris Johnson. One of them has not said anything publicly. The one that was critical of him said, I hope you've done your duty. The other one replied, I most certainly have. That's not somebody who is outspoken about the Prime Minister, and it's those sorts of noises from MPs who haven't come out publicly in opposition to Boris Johnson that will worry those around the Prime Minister. Iain, let's try and answer your question directly. I think Boris Johnson will win this vote. I think it will not be by the margin that Downing Street would have liked. It's possible that I think 130, 140, maybe even more Tory MPs will have voted against him. He will get through tonight, I suspect, but the next few weeks, particularly with those 2 by-elections, the next few months with the Privileges Committee investigation are going to be very, very difficult for the Prime Minister. And even if he makes it through this vote, still in power, still in Downing Street, that's not to say by any means, Iain, that his problems will have gone away.
Ben, thank you. David Lammy, let's come to you. Take your Labour Party hat off, as you do every Saturday afternoon. I mean, you've been in Parliament for quite a long time, haven't you? 22 years. So, I mean, you've seen quite a lot of leadership contests in both parties. What are your instincts telling you here?
I think my instincts say, look, when this happens, when the party kind of breaks for cover, and you know that you've got a significant bunch of your colleagues who are against you, it's a slow bleed. So even if Boris Johnson survives tonight, it's a bit like a B-52 plane that's lost its engine. I mean, it's heading in one direction. It's not good. This is not a Prime Minister now
Quite
that I
a slow
think is going to
landing
go
for
on.
B-52.
Well, we'll see. But this is not a Prime Minister, I think, that's going to go on for years and years and years. That's just not the way it goes. If you look at not just successive Conservative elections, but also when Labour leaders are in trouble. So I think this is bad news. And as I was walking around Westminster today, it was clear that there are, sage-like colleagues in the Conservative Party who've got the mood of Conservative associations, who are also looking forward, looking ahead to inflation figures, a tough period on cost of living, and are saying to themselves, actually, I think we might need a fresh start. I just think that's we might need a fresh start. We need a new bounce, because the other issue is not just the issue of lying and Partygate. It's, are the public able to trust this guy in tough political waters going forward?
I can see that Labour hat slowly being put back on.
That was a very good Conservative colleague said that to me today. And there's a sense of concern because it's broken.
Is it in the Labour Party's interest, do you think, for him to go?
I think this is way beyond that, to be honest. And I have to say, there are some backbench Conservative MPs who I think would be a challenge for the Labour Party, because they would be moving the Conservative Party back to a sort of one nation position.
You're talking Jeremy Hunt.
But I think it's unlikely that those, from what I see and hear in the membership of the Conservative Party, it's unlikely that that's the direction in which they would go. So the other names around, it really doesn't matter. I think politically we should take heart from this, obviously.
So I think it's a really, really interesting thought there, because many interesting thoughts, of course, David, but at the end there in particular, because I think the dilemma of the Conservative Party, as I was saying earlier on, I mean, I go way back to Margaret Thatcher's first leadership contest, and what unites that and everything that's happened since is Europe. And I think the problem is that those, as it were, more centre-ground Conservatives tend to be either Remainers or very, very half-hearted late Brexiters, and I think the pro-Brexit part of the Conservative Party won't have them. And yet, if you want a kind of liberal, mainstream Conservative who's going to clean up the stables after Boris Johnson and prepare the Tory party for a great victory at the next general election, then it's very unlikely to be a hardcore Brexiter. So I think the party is divided. And I think the big dilemma for Tory MPs over the evening has been, do we stick with Boris Johnson, listening to those polls, hearing the boos, looking at all the messages coming into LBC and I'm sure all the other broadcasts in the course of the day? Do we stick with that? Or do we risk complete mayhem as the Conservative Party splits into different factions that then fight each other? And that's a real dilemma. I mean, it's, do you stick with today's disgrace or do you go for chaos later? It's not a very happy position to be in.
I think also be under no doubt that members of Parliament respond to what their constituents are telling them. these are Conservative MPs, many of them backbenchers, getting email after email, letter after letter, and they're getting concerned about their own majorities. It's that's when you know the game's up.
But the dilemma for a Conservative MP is if you're a Conservative MP in what's supposedly a safe seat in the South, Lib Dem facing safe seat, you're probably panicking a bit at the moment. And if you're a Conservative MP in the north of England, a Labour facing seat, you're panicking. And this is where, Boris Johnson created this coalition in 2019, hugely successfully, but that could be about to shatter. Now, obviously, that would be to your benefit and probably the Liberal Democrats.
So there are different...
No doubt about it. And I remember, frankly, when Jeremy Corbyn was running into problems, it was often colleagues in part of the so-called Red Wall who could see their majorities disappearing, who were raising alarm bells. And it feels a bit similar, but you're right, this is coming from two places within the Conservative Party. A traditional place in the South where there's an unease, and then he's got this bulk of new MPs in the so-called Red Wall, who are also growing increasingly uneasy.
But I was speaking to one of your colleagues, David, in the shadow cabinet, who said the trouble is, actually, Boris Johnson remains a formidable electoral force in an election, particularly in the north. My constituents don't really see him as a Conservative for all his foibles and his faults. They see him much more as one of them. And this person said that they'd much prefer to see him gone, actually. It'd be easier for the Labour Party without Boris Johnson.
People say, I voted for Boris. They don't say I voted Conservative. And that's the challenge.
We saw the same in London, of course, during the mayoral elections.
Yeah. I think he's increasingly like Marmite. There are folk who feel passionately about Boris, but by God, the people that really despise him are mounting up, and they're not just Labour people. I've met lots of Conservatives who say, I can't vote for this guy, I didn't want him in the first place. Oh, Ed Miliband.
It reminds me of Peston. Rob Peston and Eddie Mair, our colleague, they famously had a long feud. They were on a book festival.
Do you think we should start one of those?
We could start one of those. Anyway, and Peston said, well, Mair said something slightly disobliging. And Peston said, well, no, I know, I'm a kind of Marmite broadcaster. To which Mair replied, like a shot, no, Robert, there are people who like Marmite.
I think we should go to a call, don't you? Let's go to Terry in Watford. Hello, Terry.
Hi, Ian. Hi, David. Hello. Hi, Andrew. Hi. My kind of question or comment is that I could see him getting a vote of, there being 120 people voting no confidence in him. And I could see his arrogance and ego going, well, I'll go to the people then. I'll call a general election. My worry is that in 6 months' time we're still debating, will he go, won't he? And there's a real paralysis at the heart of government at the moment. So many U-turns, windfall tax, gay conversion therapy. They talk about they're getting on with the job. I don't see that. I see them doing anything but.
Well, I think that's a really interesting and insightful question, because this whole idea of if he doesn't get a very big majority today, that he could call an election, I think is gathering a bit of pace. Now, on the face of it, you think, well, that would be utter madness. But in Boris Johnson's mind, he would say, well, I'm not having Tory MPs having this influence over the process. If the people want to get rid of me, they can do that in a general election. And you can see there is a certain amount of logic to that. But the electorate, I think, would probably react rather badly to that, because any political party that goes into an election has got to have a vision for the next 5 years. And at the moment, the Conservative vision for the next 5 years is bring back pounds and ounces and bring back grammar schools, a back to the future vision. And you cannot articulate a vision within a 3-week election campaign if you haven't done the groundwork. As Linton Crosby always says, you can't fatten a pig on market day. But he may think, yes, but what about the Labour Party? Because you, David Lammy, I'd say you collectively, you haven't articulated a vision for the country for the next 5 years either. So it might be a zero-sum game.
Look, I don't think the public will thank Boris Johnson for an election now. They don't want one. There's no mood for a general election.
You should be thirsting for
No, look, if he calls one, we'll go to the country, we'll make our case. And I think we could do extremely well against this backdrop, because it'll be a general election effectively about Partygate. So if he wants to do that, let him do it.
Just following on from Iain's point there, don't you agree that actually this period of politics has almost made it too easy for the opposition? All you have to do is point a finger and go, look at him, look at him, look at him. You don't really want him. He's a disgrace, blah, blah, blah. And in that period, what you haven't yet done is sold the country a really big alternative economic and social vision. You know, you haven't totted up all those things that are going wrong in the country at the moment and told us how you're going to sort them out, the passport office or the courts or the dirty rivers or whatever it might be. There's a whole series of things, NHS dentistry. And what we're not hearing from the Labour Party is a big, clear, bold, this is how we're going to make the country better kind of vision. And in a sense, the Boris Johnson melodrama has made it a bit easy for you guys.
Well, look, the truth is, the judgment about when the next general election would be is May 2024. Political parties know in opposition that what you can do is announce policies, and what effectively happens is the best of those policies are stolen by the government. We saw
a couple of weeks ago.
The windfall tax. Yeah. So there's a reason why you keep the powder dry. The vision stuff for us, the cycle begins really at party conference in September going forward. You're
too late if he calls an election now.
It's not too late, because the public, you've just said quite clearly, one of the issues with Boris Johnson is what's his vision. It's not really completely clear what his vision. Everything seems to be a priority for Boris Johnson, and nothing is a priority almost. So in that sense, it's evens. We'll make our case at the general election. The public will decide. But I think there's quite a lot of the public who do not want a general election.
No, I
won't thank him for asking them to make the judgment. So I suspect a lot of Conservatives will be like, what is he doing?
I completely agree with that. I think back to Gordon Brown, the public do not reward politicians who call unnecessary general elections.
Not another one, says Betty in Bristol again.
No, not another one. Not another one.
I love elections. I love election nights.
I know you do.
Happily have one anytime, any place. David, we have to let you go. Thank you very much indeed. You can listen to David on Saturday at 4 o'clock on LBC. Andrew Marr and I will be taking more of your calls in a second. 0345 6060 973. You're listening to Iain Dale on LBC News and LBC. It's 18 minutes past 8.
This is LBC. This is LBC with Iain Dale. Call 0345 6060 973.
90 minutes past 8 on LBC. Only 40 minutes to go until we find out whether Boris Johnson has prevailed in this no confidence vote. Nicholas Watt, the political editor of Newsnight, says some very long faces on supporters of Boris Johnson after the poll closed. One Prime Minister ally said of Tory MPs, they're a bunch of lying snakes. I don't trust anything they say. That's not very obliging, is it, Andrew?
It's not very obliging. It may be accurate. I mean, there's just this sense, and we may be all completely wrong, there's something in the air which feels a bit ominous for Boris Johnson.
Do you know,
in terms
that's
of the numbers.
Exactly how I feel.
It's
I'd love to disagree with you, but I can't.
We'll find something else to disagree with.
Let's talk about Scotland a little bit, because it seems as though virtually every Scottish MP is voting against Boris Johnson. The leader of the Scottish Tories, Douglas Ross, former PPS to Liz Truss, John Lamont, Andrew Bowie, the North Aberdeenshire and Kincardine MP, and the former Scottish Secretary David Mundell. They've all voted against Boris Johnson, and yet he is the Minister for the Union. Now, again, that's quite ominous.
It is ominous. I mean, I've thought for quite a long time that the Conservatives in London have been incredibly complacent about the union. You know, I'm from Scotland, and I go back and I talk to friends, I talk to folk. Now, it's true the SNP have not had a good year, and it's true they have real dilemmas ahead if they're going to try and hold a referendum next year, which they keep claiming they're going to. I don't think they can do it. But, you look at the demographics, all those younger cohorts of voters are really, really strongly against the union. And there is no great sort of drumbeat of support or love for the union in Scotland. It's going in the opposite direction. And, you know, part of the problem, I'm afraid, is Boris Johnson personally, and part of the problem is Brexit. I can remember going up after the Brexit vote and talking to lifelong unionist voters, Tory and Labour, who said they were moving into the SNP because they felt Brexit had been imposed on Scotland from the outside. Now, there are answers to all these things. I just think there needs to be more of a sense of urgency. I was talking to one cabinet minister who said that Boris Johnson and he had decided absolutely there would not be a referendum next year. They would tough it out, and they would stop the SNP having that. And I think so. I think that's going to happen. But, you know, the Scottish Tories are in a real problem. They were led brilliantly for a while by Ruth Davidson. Since then, it's been much tougher. And there was a lot of mockery for Mr. Ross and various others who were pro-Johnson, then anti-Johnson, then pro-Johnson, now anti-Johnson. They have to make their minds up. But, of course, that's a huge problem for Boris Johnson. We were talking earlier on, Iain, about what kind of Prime Minister he can be after a really tough vote of confidence. One of the things he has to do is to hold all parts of the country, all parts of the Conservative family somehow together. Now, if he has lost Scotland, then that's a huge part of the traditional Conservative and Unionist Party family that has gone. And I think that's an enormous problem for him. But you look in any direction, you look at the Thatcherites, you look at the One Nation, there's lots of parts of the Conservative Party who are drifting away from him. The kind of economic Thatcherites over that U-turn on...
and it's odd in a way, isn't it? Because he has always been a traditional One Nation Conservative. He's not some head-banging right-wing nutter. He's always been quite moderate. On immigration, he was the one that proposed an immigration amnesty. So he's got to get through to not just Scotland, but the fact that is where he is. But it's not coming through at the moment, is it?
He's a political chameleon. I mean, he was a very, very liberal Conservative when he was fighting in London against Ken Livingstone. And, you know, he was all for immigration. He was all for, you know, the biggest mosaic of different communities and all of that kind of stuff. And then I think because he saw Brexit as his route to the top, frankly, and I'm sure he became convinced of his own arguments. It took a little while. Those famous two articles and so forth. He then found himself the champion of a whole new bunch of Conservative voters, in the Red Wall, but also elsewhere. Lots of socially conservative people who felt they had been left behind by London, they'd been cut out, and all the rest of it. He became their champion. And you could see on the night that he won his big general election victory, he was really genuinely moved. He talked about their hands hovering over the ballot paper before, and he said, "I'll never let you down. I'll never let you down." So in a sense, he has been appropriated by his new group of voters.
Interesting text here from somebody who says, "I'm Labour through and through. I have voted Green. Only Rory Stewart would tempt me to the Tories." And, you know, I'm doing this show at the Edinburgh Fringe this year, and I've got all sorts of different politicians from both sides of the fence. And Rory Stewart is the one that sold the second most tickets, and he hasn't been involved in mainstream politics for a couple of years. And I think, well, that's very, very interesting as a reflection of maybe where Scotland is in a sense.
Well, indeed. And I think there is actually a large unrepresented part of the UK, Scotland and England and Wales and Northern Ireland, where, as it were, old-fashioned, moderate, sort of One Nation Conservatives feel that they are a bit homeless. They don't feel happy under Boris Johnson, and they don't see Labour parties coming anywhere near close to them. and therefore they cast around looking for their hero, and at the moment their hero is Rory Stewart.
Right, well, let's go to some calls. If you've got a question on the whole procedure of this leadership well, it's not a leadership election yet. We mustn't get ahead of ourselves on this vote of confidence. Feel free to text those into 84850. Robert is in Norwich. Hello, Robert.
Hello, Ian. I'd like to ask a question of Andrew Marr, if I may, please. Towards the end of his programme this evening, he mentioned Ben Wallace, and I have for some time favoured him because I think as Defence Minister and a former Scots Guards officer, he's probably done a lot of planning for Ukraine, which we're now seeing the fruits of. I see him as a safe pair of hands. He's got experience in Northern Ireland. He's from a northern constituency, Preston, North, I think it is, and I suspect it's appealed far more north of the border than Johnson ever will do. I was very interested in what Andrew Marr had to say about Scotland just now.
I'd really like to respond to that. One tiny little straw in the wind tonight, by the way. Boris Johnson arrived for the vote down the committee corridor with Ben Wallace by his side. Never forget that he launched his own leadership campaign in part from Ben Wallace's house. They know each other very well indeed. Now, Ben Wallace, full disclosure, is no great friend of mine. I don't know him at all. But I look across the potential candidates.
Does that mean he's an enemy?
I have no enemies at all, none at all. He just won't come on my show, and I can't work out why. And I get the sense it's personal. Anyway, put that to one side. If you look across at the potential candidates, I think he's a very, very plausible alternative. If Boris Johnson is decapitated or defenestrated or whatever, de-somethinged, then the Tories have to find somebody who doesn't rub salt in the wound. Wallace is not Boris Johnson. He is very, very different.
But he's a
very
close ally.
Very close ally. But
although they did have a bit of a split, didn't they?
They did, but a lot of people who liked Boris Johnson inside the Tory party, and they are there, listeners and viewers, by the way, they're still there. A lot of people like Boris Johnson would find Ben Wallace an acceptable alternative. He has indeed had a very, very good war. He was early on the Ukraine business. He's been very strong. He's got his Scottish connections and that Scots Guard military thing. They're going to need somebody who is a bit of a disciplinarian, who starts to whip them back into an organised party after all of this, and I can see him doing that.
Let me tell you why I don't. Because I think all of his ministerial posts have been in the security and defence field. He's kind of a bit of a one-trick pony in a sense. Now, that's not a bad thing, because I think sometimes it's good to have specialists. But when you're Prime Minister, you've got to cover the whole gamut of policy, and I'm not sure he's got a track record that enables him to do that.
I suppose I'm really saying, if not him, who? Because, everyone I look at, I can see problems with. I mean, I'm a big admirer of Jeremy Hunt. I think he had a big lot of problems when he was Health Secretary and all the rest of it, but he has fessed up. He has written a big policy book about what he got wrong and what has gone wrong in the NHS. I know lots of people can't stand him, but he seems to me to be an entirely courteous, reasonable, thoughtful, middle-of-the-road Conservative, but I just see huge numbers of Tories who will not have him at any price because he did not vote for Brexit, and so on.
Although he has become a convert.
He says he's made his peace with Brexit, I think was the phrase he used.
Well, in the 2017 party conference, I asked him, if you were to vote again now, what would you vote? And he said, I would vote to leave because of the way the European Union have acted.
Ian, could he give you any other answer and stay as a leading member of the Conservative
Well, he
Party?
did give me that answer, which is more than Theresa May did the following week, where she just gulped and couldn't give an answer at all.
I can imagine
but I hear what you say about the appeal throughout the rest of the party.
I don't know. It seems to me that, in terms of the available people, if there's anybody from the cabinet, I think it's more likely to be Ben Wallace than anybody else. Though, of course, he and Liz Truss have been sort of jostling for quite a while for that role, and Liz Truss has been working very, very hard for it too.
And actually, a lot of her detractors thought that when she got the Foreign Office job, that would be the undoing of her. But in many ways, you could argue that she hasn't put too many feet wrong.
It's not a very difficult job just at the moment, in the sense, as long as you say very, very rude things about Putin at regular intervals and express your support for Ukraine, there isn't a lot that you can do wrong at the moment. We'll see how she handles. The big question for her is going to be the Northern Ireland Protocol, which is a very, very hot potato, or if you're going to have a ticking hot potato, it's a ticking hot potato, which she has to defuse and deal with quite quickly.
I'm going to get that image out of my head. Half an hour to go before we get the result of this vote of confidence. Sir Graham Brady will deliver the verdict at exactly 9 o'clock. Do stay with us. It's 8:30 on LBC and LBC News. Andy Ivey has the headlines.
Voting has finished in a motion of confidence in the Prime Minister. Boris Johnson needs the backing of at least 180 Conservative MPs to remain. He himself cast a vote at Committee Room 10 in Parliament over his leadership. Beforehand, the MP for Berwickshire, Roxburgh and Selkirk, John Lamont, resigned as a ministerial aide to Liz Truss. He voted against Mr Johnson, saying he'd received thousands of emails about the PM's performance over the last few weeks and months. The Attorney-General, Suella Braverman, has reiterated her support for Boris Johnson, describing him as passionate and dedicated. We're expecting the result at 9 o'clock this evening. LBC weather, dry for most areas tonight and chilly in places. Tomorrow, sunny spells but a few showers across Wales and central and southern England, a high of 21 degrees.
This is LBC. Leading Britain's conversation. Iain Dale. Tweet at LBC.
It's 8:34 on LBC and LBC News. Andrew Marr with me. We are about to get the result of the no confidence vote in about 26 minutes' time, right on the dot of 9 o'clock. That's what Sir Graham Brady has promised us. I said earlier that Graham Brady used to work for me when he was a stripling. I used to run a...
I can't imagine him as a stripling.
No, indeed. I used to run a transport lobbying consultancy, and he joined us. He was at the Centre for Policy Studies, and he was with us for about 3 years. He was only about 27. And then he got selected for the safe seat of Altrincham and Sale. He couldn't believe it. We couldn't believe it. So we lost him to the House of Commons.
He still looks slightly surprised to be there occasionally. Kind of slightly.
But the one thing, I mean, he is somebody who you just know is never going to leak about how many letters he's got. But he was spotted last Wednesday in the House of Commons during the recess, and I did think to myself, there's a reason he's down here. And that's when I thought, the numbers are there.
And he was very discreet.
Now we have a fan, David Smith says, Iain, first of all, what a great show. It's almost better than your election night specials. Almost. You and Mr. Marr are really the A-team. Well, thank you very much. How many spoilt ballot papers do you think there will be? Is this an easy cop-out for some MPs to say with a clear conscience, I didn't vote against you, Prime Minister? Rishi, maybe. How many MPs do you think will draw pictures of genitalia on the ballot papers?
I think most of them, frankly. I think that's the way it's going. No, I think almost nobody will spoil their ballot papers, and very few will.
There are a few there are usually two or three that do on there. But you think, what's the point? That's almost being very irresponsible, isn't it? Chris says, Iain and Andrew, the next leader of the Conservative Party is going to be Penny Mordaunt, acceptable to the Tory faithful, grandees, and will appeal to the middle ground and younger voters. Add in military backing, and you've got the Red Wall, Middle England and suburbs voters relaxing. I think that is a very insightful text.
Well, we keep saying, or hacks like me keep saying, that politicians should be more honest and own up to their mistakes. And not mentioning Penny Mordaunt earlier in this programme is entirely my bad, because Chris is completely right. I'm not saying she will be the next leader, but she's a very strong contender.
She's a dark horse.
I just failed to mention earlier on. She is a dark horse, member of the government. She's been in cabinet, albeit briefly. Very experienced, calming. Would it not be extraordinary? You've got the Labour Party, the great, allegedly progressive force in British politics. They never, ever managed to choose a woman leader. This would be the third Conservative female leader in a row. Not in a row, but third Conservative leader in a relatively short period of time. That would be quite something.
If she got on the ballot paper as one of the final two, I think she might do rather well. But I think she's going to have a struggle getting on the ballot paper, because she's not rated by some MPs some who will never forgive her for proposing Jeremy Hunt in the last leadership election. I mean, Boris Johnson certainly hasn't forgiven her. And some people point to, shall we say, a mixed ministerial record.
Well, this is why you're on this show, Iain, because you know far more about these things than I do. And I'm sure you're right. But the big struggle will be who is the last two, because you look at the Conservative, we were talking about Conservative Home earlier on, and they produce endless polls about who's up and who's down. And at the moment, as I can recall, I think it's Liz Truss versus Ben Wallace, the two most popular at the moment. And so if either of those two get into the last two, they'll probably walk it. But
Liz Truss, I think, is the only candidate to have probably a Stop Liz Truss movement. There are MPs who would move heaven and earth not to have her as leader, but she has successfully created this image of a sort of sub-Thatcher, hasn't she?
What about sitting on tanks? You sit on enough tanks, people think of Margaret Thatcher.
Right, let's go to more calls. Anthony's in Blackpool. Anthony, hi, what would you like to say?
Hi, just to briefly preface my question, your speculations have led me to think of the line, you don't need a weatherman to know which way the wind blows. But my question is, it's something I haven't heard referred to, really. Whatever the outcome of this vote of no confidence is, what are the implications for the forthcoming parliamentary standards inquiry? I.e., if Boris Johnson does survive in reasonable, health, is he kind of bulletproofed?
That's a really, really good question.
I don't think it has any influence on the Standards Committee at all.
Well, the Standards Committee, I think, might be tough. Looking at the Conservative members on it, they're not natural friends of Boris Johnson's. They're lawyers, including employment lawyer. I think two of them are going to lose their seats at the next election because of boundary changes and so on. So they'll be tough. If they come out and say in terms that he broke the ministerial code, will he go? If he's won this and won this well, the answer is probably he won't. Iain, do you agree?
I think I do agree on that. Anthony, thank you very much. Let's cross back to Central Lobby in the Houses of Parliament. Ben Kentish is live there with the Secretary of State for International Trade, Anne-Marie Trevelyan. Ben.
That's right, Iain, joined here by Anne-Marie Trevelyan, the International Trade Secretary. Anne-Marie, thank you for your time this evening. What does it say about the Prime Minister that we've even got to this stage?
So I think the vote that we've got this evening reflects some frustrations that colleagues have built up. Interestingly, talking to many colleagues today, trying to encourage them to support the PM, a mixture of anxieties that they wanted to raise, and I think once we're the other side of this, the Prime Minister will be able to bring everyone together and be able to move forward and really harness some of those anxieties and indeed drive on with what is a really important Conservative agenda.
The people I speak to seem to think Boris Johnson will get through tonight's vote. He'll win the vote, but possibly by a fairly comparatively narrow margin. How damaging would it be if he doesn't win this vote comfortably?
So I hope, and I think you're right, that he's going to win it. And I think what's important then is his really keen focus to bring everyone together tomorrow in the next few days and really set out what the Conservative agenda for the months and years ahead looks like, so that everyone can come and support that agenda. There are many areas of policy that are important in terms of cost of living, the energy revolution, thinking about how we help transform travel, support businesses and all our citizens and our constituents day by day, and the Prime Minister is absolutely focused on getting that right.
Do you really think that, given today's events, given what we've heard from dozens of your colleagues in recent days, this is a leader who can unite the Conservative Party? Because it feels tonight that it's deeply, deeply divided over his leadership.
So I think the issues, as I say, that colleagues have raised are different concerns. Some of them obviously come from the Partygate Sue Gray report, and those are issues that the Prime Minister has set out very clearly. He's apologised for the issues that relate to them, and he really wants to take the Conservative Party forwards to deliver on the amazing and important agenda that we have to deliver. And I think all my colleagues across the Conservative Party want to do that as well. So I'm very optimistic that tomorrow morning we'll be able to draw that together and he will be able to set that out for the party and indeed for the country.
But it is the case that tomorrow morning, whatever happens, probably upward of 100 of your colleagues do not want Boris Johnson to continue as leader. Is that really a sustainable position? Can he really continue to lead the party, given that extent of opposition going forward?
So a vote of confidence is exactly that, and if he wins the vote of confidence, I know that he will want to take forward that vote and move forward. And that, colleagues, we are a very democratic party, and we are people. You look at the differences between our positions on Brexit over the years. The vast majority have always said whatever the democratic outcome is, that's the one we follow, and that is something that we're very good at and very committed to in the Conservative Party. And I know that colleagues will want to pick up and move forwards with Boris when he wins this confidence vote tonight.
So if he wins, hypothetically, by 5 votes, maybe by 1 vote, you think you're confident he can still continue, he'll still have the support of you and your cabinet colleagues, even if he scrapes home by such a wafer-thin margin?
He will absolutely have my support, and I know cabinet members' support, because we want to work alongside him to deliver the important Conservative agenda around cost of living, around energy transformation, ensuring that we can deliver the infrastructure revolution that he is committed to, and make sure that we do that in a way that makes sure we use value for money and we get where we need to. We've got to level up. The Prime Minister's commitment, speaking as a North East MP, as levelling up across the country to make sure that the opportunity is available to all our children, to all our families across the country. He's absolutely committed to that, and I know all my colleagues are too, and I look forward to standing right next to him as we push that forwards tomorrow.
Thank you. Iain, Anne-Marie Trevelyan there, International Trade Secretary. Back to you.
Ben, thank you very much. That's Ben Kentish in Central Lobby. 17 minutes to go until we get the result of this all-important vote. Andrew Marr, Anne-Marie Trevelyan there, key supporter of Boris Johnson. She seems incredibly confident that he will win. I suppose she would say that, wouldn't she? But, I mean, the most likely result is for him to win by a reasonable margin, isn't it?
Of course, the most likely result is a win by a reasonable margin. I mean, I've said what I've said. I think the country is turning against him, and I think the Conservative Party bit by bit is turning against him. But what people like me have to remember is that out there are an awful lot of Tory MPs who think they are only treading the corridors of Westminster because of Boris Johnson, and that he has got a kind of charismatic... And
some of them are right.
Some of them are right, and he has had a kind of charismatic reach. Now, I think that's perhaps ending, but I'm always reminded of a story I was told by someone very close to me about when he visited a hospital in London. And it was shortly after the end of the pandemic, I think, and he was still very unpopular among the NHS staff. And doctors, as well as nurses, had lined a kind of big balcony around the main atrium, and they were booing him as he came in. And I think that any other politician I can think of would have turned tail and quietly left again. Boris waved at them and said, yes, absolutely, quite right, I'd be booing me too, absolutely, top hole, absolute duffer and all the rest of it, goes charging up the stairs and starts to meet them. And within 20 minutes, he's won them all round. He is an extraordinarily effective
There's
campaigner.
another politician that was very good at that, Nigel Farage.
Really?
When he was on LBC in your hour, I mean, the number of people who would ring in, determined to have a row with him, really a vicious row with him, and then by the end of the call, he'd charmed them into submission. And that is a rare talent for politicians, isn't it?
It's a very, very rare talent indeed. I don't think there's anybody inside the Conservative Party now who is as effective an electoral campaigner as Boris Johnson. I remember in the old days, and a lot of this is about humour, and, you know, people call him a bumbling clown now, but he's always been very clever with his use of humour. I remember the old days, I'm sure you do too, Iain, when at the Tory party conference there'll be one speech we should have people queuing around the block to hear him, and it was always Boris Johnson. And so if he wins tonight, there's a little bit of that still at the back of people's brain pates, as it were, bouncing around, and that'll be why.
There's still, I mean, he's got whatever it is, he's got it. It's one of those indescribable things. It's not just charisma, it's more than that. It's the ability to bring people out of the hairdressers when he's walking down a high street. And even now, that would happen. Yes, there would be a few boos, but it would still happen.
And you can never tell, I mean, in terms of what kind of politicians. When I first came into the Commons, people, like now, they're always going off to the bars and the restaurants, and there was an old annunciator machine before the days of electronic ones, which would click up with the name of MPs speaking. And there were 2 MPs, possibly 3, who would empty the bars and the restaurants because no one could avoid being there to hear them. And one was Michael Foot and one was Enoch Powell. They could not have been more different, but they were both brilliant, brilliant speakers. And those days of the great charismatic speaker, which puts the sort of goosebumps on the back of your neck, I fear that's beginning to come to an end, but Johnson, on a good day, can be one of them.
It's partly coming to an end because sometimes they're only allowed to have 2-minute speeches or 5-minute speeches.
I know, it's outrageous.
And it just doesn't really work. Well, we could go down a rabbit hole there, but I don't think we will. We are 14 minutes away from getting the result. If you're just listening to us, you're very welcome to, but you can watch us on Global Player and the LBC YouTube channel. That result in 14 minutes' time. And then we'll spend an hour ruminating over what the consequences are. We'll come to more of your calls in a moment as well. It's 8:46.
LBC, Nick Ferrari at breakfast.
Sir Roger Gale, Conservative MP for North Thanet.
I submitted my letter 18 months ago after the Barnard Castle affair.
Over the last 18 months, many of his allies, Sir Roger, would point to issues such as the Ukraine, but that's not coloured your thinking.
I absolutely agree. Mr Johnson and the government, of course, have done everything they possibly can to assist Ukraine. That said, unfortunately, there have been so many other instances of things that have gone wrong. I think the time has come when we have to say that the party is divided. Mr Johnson said himself, divided parties don't win elections. We have to have a new leader to take us through that.
Follow the fallout of the Prime Minister confidence vote with a Nick Ferrari at breakfast special tomorrow morning from 6, only on LBC. Iain Dale on LBC.
8:49 on LBC. Only 11 minutes to wait until we find out the result. Earlier I was doing some calculations, Andrew, about how many votes he would need to get. I think 60%. If you get 60%, you can reasonably say, well, I've got more than the majority. I still think 2/3, it needs to be around that area to be very safe. But I mean, if you think about it, a lot of people are now suggesting...
Just remind us what 60% would mean
60%
tonight.
would mean 215 votes with 145 MPs voting against.
That's quite big.
Well, I still think it could be more than that. I mean, if I was...
So do I.
I hate putting my cards on the table on this, but that is kind of what we're paid to do. So I'm going to say 154 votes against.
I'm 4 below you. I'm 150, but I think it's also possible that Boris Johnson could lose this vote. I mean, I really think there is something out there which doesn't smell right to me.
A former cabinet minister said to me earlier he thinks there's a 10% chance that he could lose the vote. Now, in a sense, you could say, well, 10% is actually quite high. And normally, in these circumstances, you wouldn't even consider it. Should we go to another caller? Simon's in Tiverton, a very important place at the moment, Simon, with the by-election going on.
Apparently, good evening, gentlemen. Hi.
Hi.
Apparently so, yeah. It's, as you say, a very important place. And I think Tiverton has been a bit shocked by what transpired with Mr. Parish, but we've got to move on with that. First of all, I just want to say, enjoying the show. Thank you for that. My point was for calling was just really this. Obviously, people have been commenting all day, etc., about the vote and what will happen, etc. But one thing no one's actually mentioned, maybe they have superficially, but not really focused on something yet. I mean, obviously, Boris has got a lot of people power, and he's been around for a very, very long time. Boris is a master political strategist, let's be honest. He's been to the most brilliant school in the country, etc., highest level of university. He's been in politics for a very, very long time. And I just get the feeling that although, he got us through Brexit, he got us through COVID, etc., I personally sort of rationally think his time is up. However, no one's actually mentioned the fact that it's quite possible that Boris is he's so politically tuned in with his strategy that he's quite possibly engineered this entire situation to happen right now. Because no one's even mentioned this. And at the moment, as much as I've got to confess, I think we need a massive change. I think we have to move on, etc. But I think people at the moment are kind of unwittingly vastly underestimating his political acumen with this vote.
So are you seriously suggesting
exactly what he's doing? Sorry.
Yeah. Are you seriously suggesting that Boris Johnson has engineered this vote of confidence himself?
Not himself, no. But my point is that he's a very, very, very intelligent guy, and I don't. But put it this way: I don't even actually agree with his policies anymore. I don't agree with what he and his chancellor do in terms of the policies they come up with, etc. But I think Boris is a very, very shrewd chap, and he's used to the corridors of power. I don't think he maybe directly sort of intended it to happen maybe right now, but I think people are vastly underestimating what the result might be from this. I'm not saying he was hoping it would actually happen now, but from his, he's so used to strategically.
All right, and Andrew wants to come back on you.
I just want to give you, Simon, an alternative view of the timing of all of this, which is that it is ultimately the result of complete incompetence and happenstance on both sides. It's certainly the case that over the Jubilee weekend, and I think the Jubilee's underrated in all of this, by the way, as a factor, but over the Jubilee weekend, there was virtually no whipping or organisation from the pro-Boris Johnson Downing Street side at all. That was a big, big mistake. But on the other side, there is no real organiser behind the revolt against him. This is not the best time for the rebels to have put in the letters, and they helped Johnson by doing so at this particular time before the by-elections. But they came in randomly, and that's just when they arrived. And this contest seems to be a bit like two really, really useless dud amateur football teams arising on a kind of mole-filled, bumpy pitch and being thrust a rugby ball by mistake. I mean, it's all complete chaos, and I think that's why we're where we are tonight, but it is only, Iain, 5.5 minutes away.
It is indeed. Simon, before I let you go, how are you voting in the by-election?
Very good question. I will probably vote, in all honesty, Labour now, actually. Because
and what did you vote in 2019?
I think it was probably Tory, actually. But I'm 53 now. When I grew up I grew up Tory, my background, and slowly but surely drifted off to the left just in terms of circumstances in life. But at the end of the day, I just think there's too much apathy, unfortunately, dare I say it, arrogance, unaccountability. And people need to start really thinking about what they're doing in terms of what the average Joe Bloggs does in the street. They have completely lost touch with that. And Neil Simon, is just the tip of the iceberg.
OK, we'll leave it there. Thank you very much. A tweet from Jimmy, who says, strangely, I've been listening to the Boris coverage on LBC, quite enjoying Andrew Marr and Iain Dale's coverage, and somehow ended up chilling in a lay-by, waiting for the results rather than going home. You stay in that lay-by, but be careful. Strange things happen in lay-bys, Jimmy. Stop. Not that I would know. Let's... This is what happens.
Enough already. This
is what happens when you get delirious halfway through these sorts of programmes, don't you? David's in Victoria. Hello, David.
Hi, good evening. I think if Boris manages to hang on and has a life after this as PM, he needs a major reshuffle and needs to bring forward a lot of people with military backgrounds and get some discipline into the government.
Very interesting thing that you... Well, it's very interesting you've said that, because I believe, and I have reason to believe this, shall we say, from sources, that if he doesn't win by a huge margin, I can't really define that, but if he wins relatively narrowly, there will be quite an extensive reshuffle and he will clear out quite a lot of people. If he wins well, then that reshuffle wouldn't happen till later in the year.
But Boris Johnson's not the government. Is he? He's not the government. He's not a one-man government.
He's the Prime Minister.
He needs better support, and I don't think he's getting it. Liz Truss, Nadine Dorries, who are these people? They're just a joke.
Well, they're the ones that are supporting
him. There are far better people on the back benches. You mentioned Penny Mordaunt. She's far better than Liz Truss.
Well, and she's not on the back benches. She's a government minister.
But she's not in the cabinet.
No, she isn't.
But Liz Truss is totally ineffective, and I think the Home Secretary and the Foreign Secretary need to be much more powerful people than we've got at the moment.
David, thank you very much. Quickly to Edward, and you call it in Bristol. Hello, Edward.
Hello there. I'll make the point really quick because I'm eager like you to hear the result. But brilliant show, by the way. I love hearing both of you.
Thank you.
Andrew Marr made the point earlier about underestimating the effect of the Jubilee on what's happening. I think it's interesting that you've got two of the most powerful positions in the country, being the Queen and the Prime Minister, and such a wide contrast in their personalities and what they stand for. And I think that the Queen clearly has had all the good words said about her, and yet the characteristics of the Prime Minister are just so just poles apart. And I think he is toast, quite frankly, and I think he is not going to survive.
Andrew?
Very bold prediction is one I've made myself, of course. I do think the Jubilee's been important because I was looking at it. I was very, very moved. I find myself surprised by how moved I was by the Jubilee concert in particular, and all their light show and the speeches, and then by the sheer wild battiness of the parade afterwards. I mean, really, only
Camp doesn't cover it.
Only the British would have produced that. But what it sort of seemed to me to say about us is that we are, with the Queen at the head, a fundamentally rule-based, law-abiding, tolerant, decent, very diverse society. And we don't like being divided against ourselves. And there's no doubt that Brexit divided against ourselves, and we don't like being made fools of. And I thought that was a kind of relatively subtle message being sent out to the country by the palace at this crucial time and about the worst possible moment for the current Prime Minister. And I think if things go badly for him tonight, historians will look back and they'll say, do you know what? That Jubilee was part of this.
Thank you very much for that, Edward. I'm looking at pictures coming from Committee Room 14. No sign of Sir Graham Brady getting on his hind legs at the moment, but he's got 40 seconds to go. Okay, let's put our cards on the table. I think you said 150 votes against,
I did,
which would be around 210 in favour. That would be around the 60% mark for Boris Johnson. I think it's going to be slightly narrower than that, but one of us is going to be proved wrong, I suppose, although we are quite near. If it is around that kind of, I mean, that's sort of almost neither betwixt and between, is it? It's sort of in no man's land.
It's going to allow a lot of journalists to spend a lot of tomorrow arguing ferociously amongst themselves, which is above all what we want. We need things to argue about, and that would give it to us. But, gosh, it is now the moment.
Well, it is the moment. It's gone 9 o'clock. You're listening to LBC News and LBC. Andrew Marr and Iain Dale with you. We're waiting to get the result from Sir Graham Brady, the chairman of the 1922 Committee of Conservative MPs. They promised it would be on the dot of 9, but clearly, as we slightly predicted earlier on, it isn't.
I think what's happened is that Graham Brady... Here we go. Here we are.
Right, let's go to Sir Graham Brady.
I can report as returning officer that 359 ballots were cast. No spoiled ballots, that the vote in favour of having confidence in Boris Johnson as leader was 211 votes, and the vote against was 148 votes. And therefore, I can announce that the Parliamentary Party does have confidence.
I think the LBC team were spot on. I think if you take my prediction and Ian's predictions and go divide with him, we're pretty much exactly there.
Well, let's look at the percentages, because 41% of Conservative MPs have voted against their leader. 59% obviously therefore voted in favour. Now, I thought it might be a little bit worse than that for him, but I mean, again, as I said before, that is political no man's land.
It is political no man's land. I'm absolutely sure Boris Johnson will be out of the front of Downing Street or wherever he is at the moment in a shot saying this is a victory, thank you to the Conservative Party. We now put all of this behind us, it's all over. And of course he will say that, but that's a heck of a lot of MPs voting against their own Prime Minister. Looking at the history of these votes going back, I'm afraid the Prime Minister is still living through a wilderness of pain, and there's more to come ahead.
It's going to be very interesting to hear what Jacob Rees-Mogg makes of this, given that when Theresa May got 63% of the vote, he said that she was now toast.
I'm quite sure that Jacob Rees-Mogg, wishing to be entirely consistent and steely in all things, will denounce the Prime Minister as a result of this and say he's finished.
So that's, just to recap, 211 votes in favour of Boris Johnson against 148. So that means that the Conservative Parliamentary Party does have confidence in Boris Johnson by a majority of 63. Now, these figures are going to be pored over for many, many days, probably weeks. And a lot of people will want to try and work out how many government ministers, how many PPSs who are still part of the government, the so-called payroll vote, voted against their own Prime Minister. And to my mind, if you have any ethics about you at all, if you're a member of a government and you vote against the Prime Minister, you should go.
You should go. I completely agree with that.
But only one has today.
Only one has, I know. And you get lots of stories about other people saying in private that they have done that. Still, you look at that, and by my very rough calculations, there are about 200 MPs who are not on the payroll vote, something like that. So that means a very large majority of the non-payroll vote probably voted against Boris Johnson. And it was on that basis that Theresa May was told that she had really effectively lost the confidence of the Conservatives.
OK, there were fewer Conservative MPs then. I think it was about 315,
yes,
was
but
it?
I was just talking about percentages.
But Theresa May had 117 vote against her, which, according to Jacob Rees-Mogg, was a very bad result.
Yeah.
Well, I don't think this is a very bad result, but it's certainly not a good result. I mean, is that? Am I sitting on the fence there a bit?
Well, I think there's nowhere else to sit this evening, frankly. Let's all sit on that same rickety fence, because that's where we are. It's As I say, I was hanging around Portcullis House and the coffee bars this morning, and the general view then was that it would be about 110 against him, 110, 150, around that number, and that's considerably higher. So had this happened a couple of days later, who knows? But he is safe tonight. But he is not safe in the short term or medium term.
Now we can see MPs coming down the committee room corridor, coming out of this meeting of the 1922 committee. I don't know how many were actually there, but they're all piling out now. It'd be very interesting to eavesdrop on some of their conversations. I'm sure that's what Ben Kentish is doing at the moment. Do you think that, try and put, this is very difficult, but try and put yourself inside the mind of Boris Johnson. What do you think his immediate reaction to that? I mean, forget what he says in public, because he clearly will be saying something in public in the next half an hour or so, I would have thought. Inwardly, what do you think he's thinking?
I can tell you exactly. He goes, phew. And then a millisecond later, he goes, cripes. So immediate, thank goodness he has got through this vote, phew, but cripes. There's a lot of people against me. I've still got that wretched committee. I've still got those wretched by-elections coming ahead. This is not going to be a great fun month. The month of May was very bad for Boris Johnson. June is proving much worse.
Now, in theory, this means he's safe for 12 months. Under Conservative Party rules, you can't be challenged again if you win a vote of confidence within 12 months. Now, they could easily change those rules, I guess.
They would have to. They would have to change those rules. There are different ways in which he could, as it were, be exited. There could be, in theory, a vote on the floor of the House of Commons, perhaps after the Privileges Committee report, or a vote of no confidence in the Prime Minister, and Labour at some point, I'm sure, will lay one. But at that point, the Conservative Party rallies behind their leader in public, and there's no way that goes through. So that's not going to be the way he goes. There could be a revolt at cabinet level, and that comes down to the Chief Whip, who would have to go into the Prime Minister and say, I'm terribly sorry, Prime Minister, you have lost the support of key members of your cabinet. Looking at this cabinet, I just don't see it happening. So I don't think either of those things. So if Conservative MPs hate the result of the Privileges Committee report and then hate the result of the by-elections, the only weapon they now have is to change the rules of the system. I can see Ben Kentish walking towards us down that corridor.
We will be speaking to him in just a moment.
That's where I think we are.
Keir Starmer has just tweeted this. The choice is clearer than ever before. Divided Tories propping up Boris Johnson with no plan to tackle the issues you are facing. Or a united Labour Party with a plan to fix the cost of living crisis and restore trust in politics. Labour will get Britain back on track. Well, that's kind of...
So long as the Durham police allow that to happen.
Yeah, it's a sort of routine thing you'd expect a party leader or an opposition leader to say, I suppose, on a night like this. But look, isn't the key thing now for Boris Johnson, if he's going to get the Conservative Party back on track, and I'm not sure that it's possible, but he's got to take a lesson from Margaret Thatcher in 1986. You were in the Commons covering things then after the Westland crisis, and then there was the Land Rover scandal. And a lot of people thought that was the end of her, that there was a possibility that she could be gone by the end of the year. Instead, what happened was that the Conservative Party rallied round. They got this really innovative set of new policies for the 1986 conference under the Next Moves Forward slogan, and off they went. Yeah. And a year later got a majority of 100. Now, I can't see that Boris Johnson has got either himself the ability to turn that round, or indeed the people around him have the ability to do that.
So the biggest problem I think he's got, we've got this huge inflationary threat, and we've got a government that's spent big twice, once recently with the windfall tax announcement, and before that during the pandemic. And so they don't have many big fiscal tools left to face the country with. Now, we're told Boris Johnson has told the Conservative Party earlier on today that he's going to bring in lots more tax cuts quite quickly, possibly even within weeks, because he's heard the lessons and he knows what needs to be done. Now, how he's going to square that with his spending commitments, I just don't know. I don't think the thing adds up at the moment. Now, in the Thatcher era, we had a very, very big ideological argument inside the Conservative Party, but we all knew what side the Prime Minister and most of the Cabinet were on, and the Conservative Party 100% backed her in that struggle. Things are a bit different now.
George says on Twitter, Durham Constabulary will make their announcement tomorrow. Nailed on. You're an old cynic, George. And Declan points out that on my blog I said anything under 215, 60%, and he's in the danger zone. But just now on LBC you said not too bad for him. How are these two statements compatible? Well, I think they are compatible. I don't think this is good for him. If I implied that I thought it was good for him, I'm sorry, but I don't think I did that. I think that anything around 60% is in the danger zone, but it's not as dangerous as I think both Andrew and I thought it might possibly.
Yeah, I think we were perhaps egging each other on a little bit earlier on, to be honest.
Surely not.
We thought those numbers might be even higher than they are.
Well, you can only get the information that you get during the course of the day, can't you?
Yes, but we have these conversations. They go round and round in circles. Certainly, I convinced myself that something I thought earlier on it must be true. But I would say these are bad numbers for Boris Johnson. 148 is
one of my friends has just texted he's now in office but not in power. Right. Which I think might be quite insightful.
Bad way of saying it.
Ben Kentish is back in his position just off Central Lobby in the House of Commons. Ben, what do you make of that result?
Well, Iain, 41% of current Conservative MPs do not have the confidence in their current party leader. That is a very, very difficult position for anyone to govern from. Boris Johnson having the support of fewer MPs, a smaller proportion that is, than Theresa May did back in 2018. He's only got, and that is really difficult to come back from. Now, his allies insist a victory is a victory, that this is a sign that the majority of Tories, of course, do have confidence in him. They will say, look, we said to our party effectively, put up or shut up. We've had the contest. The party has backed the Prime Minister. He'll now get on with the job and delivering these promises to the British people. That will be the line from number 10. Rebels will say, and this will start, Iain, I think within minutes, it is impossible for any leader to govern a united party when clearly close to getting on for half, 41%, somewhere between a third and half of his MPs don't want him to be leading that party. They will say that he cannot unite the party, that those divisions will continue and that it risks effectively handing the next election to Labour. That's what the rebels will say. These figures, 148, that is at the upper range of what the rebels thought they might get. It's at the dangerous end of the range when it comes to what number 10 thought we might be looking at tonight. And Iain, anybody who thought, and this was the line from number 10 throughout the day, that this leadership vote would draw a line under matters, that it would allow the party to come together and move on, I think the result we've just witnessed means that is highly unlikely to happen anytime soon.
Andrew, before we go to a break and then we'll take some calls, just wrap up for us sort of where you see things going now, because a former Tory MP friend of mine has just texted me to say he's toast, but it will take time.
Well, I come back to the timing of this particular contest, which was, as I say, an accident. It wasn't meant to happen like this. It was an accident. The real plotters would have wanted it in a few weeks' time after those by-elections. Had we had no vote today, and had we had those by-elections, had the Tories lost both of them, then I think Boris Johnson might have actually lost such a vote. So again, we say again and again and again, and rightly so, that across his career, for all the scrapes and the mistrust and the lies and so forth, Boris Johnson has been a lucky politician, and I think in a sense he's a lucky politician again today, and I'm sure now, looking at this vote, he's going to do the right thing and to get the beers in.
Oh, that's a risky thing to do, isn't it? Let's go to Lewis in Newcastle. Hi, Lewis.
Hi.
Hello, what's your reaction to the result?
Disappointed, I would say, to be honest.
In which way?
In the way that he's not been, he's not gone, to be honest. I voted in the recent local elections for the first time, and obviously I voted Labour, and I've grown up with this Conservative intake since 2010, and I've not seen anything appealing to vote for the Conservative Party when I vote for the first time at the next general election.
That is a real challenge for the Conservative Party. excuse me, that's a real challenge for the Conservative Party, isn't it? Because the one thing that Margaret Thatcher, she was successful in many ways, but she did attract quite a large youth vote. They could see what she was trying to do in many ways. And I think David Cameron probably did that. But since his time, if you look at the proportion of under-25s voting Conservative, it's going gradually down. If you look at the number of people from ethnic minorities voting Conservative, it's on the decrease, whereas up until then, there'd been a gradual increase over the years. So, I mean, that's a real challenge for them, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. I get it from a lot of the people I talk to day in, day out at like my sixth form and my friends and things. We all have a staunch dislike of the current Conservative Party and its way it's run. And it mainly comes from me is the fact is the education system was so badly underfunded. By the time I got to high school, I have special educational needs and the funding just isn't there. And it stems from that view is that I'm directly affected. And I feel like, especially with the current cost of living crisis, my future is being, inadvertently screwed with by the Tory government. And I feel like I have no opportunities when I get out of university and get into the world of work and things because of the current economic situation.
Lewis, thank you for your call. A text here from the Fifth Wizard says, "Hey, LBC, get Iain and Dale and Andrew Marr their own show, right?" Well, we actually have our own shows. We succeed each other, if you see what I mean. Blooming marvellous, listening to them both. Older versions of Ant and Dec. Which one are you?
I'm neither, Adam. I can't do the voice. Can you do the voice?
If I try to do a Geordie accent, it comes out as Welsh. So it's probably best not to. David is in... Stop it. David is in Altrincham. Hello, David.
Hello, Ian. Hello, Andrew. Lovely show tonight. Nice to see you both there today.
Good.
Two great political minds together. Wonderful. What a result tonight, which brings me on to my question, really. I didn't think I'd be on before the result was announced, but we'll try anyway. The establishment always get their own way. And I can't help thinking, particularly now the result has been shown, that there are men in and around the corridors of power busily dusting off their grey coats. What do you think?
What, to get Boris out, you mean?
Yes.
To what effect? I mean, to get who in? I mean, who is this establishment candidate that you think the men in grey suits would approve of?
Well, the establishment, they always have somebody waiting in the wings. I think you both realise
who is this establishment that you talk of? I mean, some people would say that Andrew and I, because of what we do, are members of the establishment.
Well, in my opinion, I'm probably going to get roasted for this, but the establishment, in my opinion, starts off at the top with the royals and then slowly comes down the order, if you get my meaning. I think...
All right, well, let's bring in Andrew. Andrew, you've written books on this sort of thing. You're far more qualified to talk about it than I am.
I've just written a very short poem.
Have you?
Boris Johnson was more in purgatory than heaven. To hear he'd got 211. The rebels thought it good, not great, chalking up 148.
Very good.
That's my verdict. Wasn't very good.
But what about this? I mean,
Sorry,
there are a lot of people. There are a lot of people like David who think that there is some establishment plot to get rid of Boris Johnson.
Well, they haven't been working very effectively, have they? In the end, I think in this country, there are a few places where all the levers of power congregate, and the main one is number 10 Downing Street. We live in something that's quite close to a sort of form of parliamentary absolutism, particularly after Brexit. There are very few organisations which can challenge a Prime Minister with a parliamentary majority, which Boris Johnson does have at the moment. If you've got that, then you've got lines out to every part of the establishment, Buckingham Palace, the police, the court system, you name it, and all of Whitehall. So it is the sort of the junction box or the switch box of the British state, and a very abnormally concentrated one. When you say, what are the real constraints on Boris Johnson? The media? Well, up to a point, but he can pull funding from bits of the media, and he can have dinners with newspaper proprietors and all the rest of it. Is it the court system? Well, he had that run-in with the Supreme Court. There are very, very few constraints. So if there isn't an establishment, then it exists on the first floor of Downing Street. And almost nowhere else in this country.
You see, if you've been to Eton and Oxford, as Boris Johnson has, I would say he's the ultimate example of someone being a member of the establishment.
It is absolutely... If you go right back to the 1950s and Harold Macmillan's cabinet, it was much mocked because of the number of old Etonians and people who'd known each other at university and Balliol College, Oxford and all the rest of it in that cabinet. Well, it's just the same now. It is quite extraordinary how one school, Eton, has a big network at the top of the Conservative Party. And a few colleges from Oxford and Cambridge have the same kind of connections. And if you're looking at any kind of plot or establishment plot or whatever, I'm not a great believer in plots. I'm not a conspiracy theorist at all. Then you look at the old boys' books of those schools and the people who know each other from way back. That doesn't, of course, mean they always get on. I mean, we were talking earlier on about Rory Stewart, for instance. Rory Stewart, as it were, the rebel anti-Johnson Conservatives, or he was at Eton as well.
Yeah.
They were all at Eton.
Oh, well, I went to Saffron Walden County High, I should point out, so I don't think I can be a member of the establishment. Someone says Statler and Waldorf, not Ant and Dec for Andrew and me.
Oh, thanks a bundle.
They're all coming in now. We are expected to hear from Boris Johnson in the course of the next few minutes, so we'll bring that to you as soon as we can. But first, it's 19 minutes past 9.
This is LBC. Leading Britain's conversation. Iain Dale. Tweet at LBC.
22 minutes past 9 on LBC and LBC News. Sam Freedman says that's the worst result a sitting PM has ever had in a confidence vote by their own MPs. That is absolutely true, isn't it?
That is absolutely true. It's a worse result than Margaret Thatcher, Theresa May or John Major.
Let's cross to Ben Kentish in the House of Commons, just outside Central Lobby. He's got George Eustace with him, the Environment, Food and Rural Affairs Secretary. Ben, over to you.
George, thanks for your time this evening. George Eustace joins me in, as you say, the Environment Secretary. 148 of your colleagues don't have trust in your party leader. Can he really continue, given that?
I think he can, but what it obviously is going to require is quite a lot of effort to
put into reconciliation of the party, to bring the party back together, to mend fences. And, that's what you have to do in a party. There will always be internal opponents of any party leader, always have been. But obviously, you want to try to pull the party together. We all stood on the same manifesto, on the same policy issues, with the same legislative agenda. And what we've got to really do now, having won this vote, is actually try and pull the party back together.
How do you think he should go about doing that?
Well, I think he's already started that work. The appointment of Steve Barclay as his chief of staff, as well as being head of the cabinet office, has already been a big change. It means that Number 10 have been, better connected to the parliamentary party than at any time in the last couple of years. Indeed, there are people who said, had there been a change sort of a year ago, they might have voted differently tonight. I've come across people who've said that. But we've just got to keep working on that, make sure that we, connect the government with the parliamentary party. That's how our system works. You cannot govern effectively unless the party of government, is broadly united on most issues. And that's what we've got to work to achieve.
There's an old adage around these parts, you would have heard it many times, divided parties don't win general elections. Is there something in that?
Well, divided parties, obviously can't get through their legislative agenda, and so that's why, and that's our system's designed that way. The government is drawn from the largest party, with ministers who come from constituencies representing that party, and that's for good reason. That the government's got to be connected to the party. Now, we won the vote tonight, but obviously it's always disappointing when you get a significant minority of our own MPs. Who have said they don't trust the Prime Minister. And what we've got to really do is work on pulling those MPs back on board. We've got a shared agenda through our manifesto. That's what we've got to work on delivering.
Does he get it? Does Boris Johnson understand what's got him into this trouble and how to get himself out of it? Because talking to some of your colleagues today, a lot of those who voted against him are of the view that he simply hasn't shown enough contrition, enough humility, that he still doesn't get what's gone wrong or how to fix it.
Well, I think he does, and he's given, obviously, several very heartfelt apologies at the dispatch box for what went on. But he's also of the view that there are, other issues that we've got to be getting on with. And so I suppose, some people may misread that. He's torn between, yes, being deeply regretful for what's happened, apologising for what's happened, recognising, his own fallibility in that, but at the same time, believing that there's a really important agenda for us as a party to focus on, and trying to make sure that the rest of the party also focus on that, because that's ultimately what we will be judged on at the next election.
Just a few years ago, Theresa May won the support of a higher proportion of your colleagues than the Prime Minister did tonight. Within a few months, she was ousted as leader of your party and as Prime Minister. How likely is it, you think, that that's a similar fate that Boris Johnson will face?
Well, obviously, it's a different scenario. Theresa May had an even greater challenge, and she didn't have a majority. And it's very, very difficult to govern the country without a majority, let alone when you're trying to do something as huge as depart the European Union. So we're in a different situation because we have got a larger majority. And all of those MPs, including ones who voted that they didn't have confidence in him tonight, were elected on the same manifesto, do support our legislative agenda. And we've got to really make sure that we work with all those MPs, pull the parliamentary party back together so it can deliver what it said it would do at the last manifesto.
And just finally, what's your message to those of your colleagues as a member of the government who spoke pretty clearly last night in saying they don't have confidence in your boss?
Well, look, I respect their view. We are all in the same party. We all stood on the same manifesto. I understand, the arguments that they've made and the reasons they've given for the position that they took. I very much disagree with them. I've taken a different position. I've supported the Prime Minister tonight because I think on the big decisions, the big calls for our country, he's got it right. But I don't think it helps anyone to allow division to last more than the day that we've seen today. Today, it's a polarising day, a binary vote on confidence in the Prime Minister. But now that he's won that vote, we need to put that behind us and basically get on with the task of pulling the party back together.
Thank you, Secretary of State. Iain, that was George Eustice, of course, Environment Secretary. Back to you in the studio.
Ben, thank you. Andrew, I would not say that was an interview full of vim and vigour from the Environment Secretary.
It wasn't quite as supportive as I think his boss might have hoped for. I've been thinking about this the last couple of minutes, and it seems to me that what we have here tonight, Iain, is the best possible result for the Labour Party in the opposition, because there's going to be more blood in the water, as I say, more pain, more agonies for the Conservatives going forward, and the worst possible result for the country, because particularly at this time, what we need is a clear, decisive leadership of the country, taking us in a reforming and successful direction. And I just don't see how Boris Johnson can deliver that after this result. I think he's going to be blocked in on almost every direction, however he moves. So I actually, we're supposed to be delighted by political scandals and problems, and in a sense I am and always have been. This is going to provide the matter, the material for both of us for weeks and months to come. But as a citizen, as it were, after that Jubilee celebration, I feel deeply depressed tonight. I don't think this is going to give us a better government. It's going to give us lots of stories. It's going to give us lots of yaboo politics and fun in Westminster, but it is not going to be good for this country.
Sam says on a text, the party, what about the country? And I think that is a question, I mean, you've just asked it there, really. That's a question that a lot of Conservative MPs are going to have to answer over the next few months. And I think we talked about the probability of a government reshuffle. I'm not sure that reshuffles are very effective in these circumstances, but I suspect it will happen after the Tiverton and Honiton and Wakefield by-elections, however they go.
And a big so what, frankly, Iain, and there will be more policy initiatives. But if tonight's vote, if this crisis was caused by Boris Johnson's character, then you can't change character with a policy initiative.
No, indeed. Well, I'm going to lose my presenting partner for the next half an hour because Andrew is going to be leaving us. It's been an absolute pleasure to present with you. And so many lovely comments on Twitter and text. And as you know, we don't always get those, do we?
No, absolutely
people seem
not.
to have liked this burgeoning partnership.
It's quite rare and surreal when they come in. So thanks to everybody who did that.
Well, thank you very much. Now we'll come to more of your calls in a moment. 0345 6060 973. I want to get your reaction to the news that Boris Johnson has prevailed, but rather narrowly, 211 votes to 148, 59% to 41%. So nearly half the Parliamentary Conservative Party voting against their leader. The worst result for an incumbent Conservative Prime Minister in any confidence vote ever. How does Boris Johnson move on from this? We're expecting to hear from him over the course of the next half an hour. We'll, of course, bring that to you live. 0345 6060 973. You're listening to LBC. I'm Iain Dale. It's 9:30.
Boris Johnson has won a confidence vote among Conservative MPs, but there was a significant rebellion. The chairman of the Backbench 1922 committee, Sir Graham Brady, announced the result half an hour ago.
The vote in favour of having confidence in Boris Johnson as leader was 211 votes, and the vote against was 148 votes. And therefore, I can announce that the Parliamentary Party does have confidence.
The majority was 63. The Education Secretary, Nadeem Zahawi, says Mr Johnson won handsomely. The Environment Secretary, George Eustice, told LBC quite a lot of effort will be required to mend fences and pull the party together. Conservative Party rules mean Mr Johnson is safe from a confidence vote for another year. The Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer, says Mr Johnson is utterly unfit for the great office he holds and has accused Tory MPs of ignoring the British public. LBC weather dry for most areas tonight and chilly in places. Tomorrow, sunny spells, but a few showers across Wales and central and southern England, a high of 21 degrees.
This is LBC.
Hello.
Iain Dale. Text 84850. This is LBC.
It's 9:33 on LBC. We'll come to your calls in a moment, but first let's have a chat with Matt Warman, Conservative MP for Boston and Skegness, and a former minister. Matt, very good evening to you. Now, when you were on the programme not that long ago, I thought you were slightly lukewarm in your support for the Prime Minister. How did you cast your vote today?
Well, I voted for the Prime Minister, and that's largely because I think the nation faces a number of challenges, whether that is the cost of living, whether that is all the other things that hit people in the pocket, and I don't see how a 3-month leadership contest helps those issues that really do make constituents email me day in, day out. So I think this is about responsible government and getting on with the job.
But when all the polls show that the electorate doesn't have the confidence and Boris Johnson can do what you think he can, isn't it a bit of a vain hope?
Well, I think the polls are not what should dictate what government does. What we should be doing is trying to say, how do we improve the lives of people who are struggling to pay their fuel bills, who are struggling to fill their cars up with petrol, that sort of stuff. That is what, for instance, the Chancellor delivered with £15 billion of public money just a few weeks ago. That is what we should be getting on with. I don't think that a navel-gazing leadership contest is going to help that stuff, and that's what we should be doing.
But people will naturally say, well, he's had a long time to do this, and you rightly point out the £15 billion package, but you mentioned about filling the cars up with petrol. Well, where I live, it's now £1.91 per litre for a tank of for a litre of diesel, and yet at the time of the spring statement it was 1.86. He cut 5p off, and now it's gone up to 1.91. That didn't work, did it?
Well, I think it is a fact that the Chancellor took 5p off the price of a tank, the price of a litre. The price continues to go up. If anything, that emphasises to me that we need to keep at it. You've seen from the OPEC countries that they're going to increase production. That's a result of Western pressure in part. That is a good thing, but none of that is served by the UK government taking 3 months off to work out who should be the next Prime Minister. What I think we should be doing, as I say, is looking at those issues, saying how can the government spend public money as best it can, and how can the government be changing policy to serve those interests. Those are really important issues.
Well, maybe
they're not the same thing as talking about who is the individual at the helm.
41% of your colleagues didn't vote for the Prime Minister. That's a higher percentage than against John Major in 1995, Margaret Thatcher in 1990 and Theresa May in 2018. How can Boris Johnson possibly unite the party, move forward with a vision for the next election under those circumstances?
Well, I think what the Prime Minister has got to do, and I say this from the backbenches, what the Prime Minister has got to do is to demonstrate that his policies, his government, is delivering on the concerns that are troubling all of us as members of Parliament, and are troubling the electorate as a whole. It is about getting on with the job, and I know that is hard. I know that my colleagues in the Conservative Party say that is what they worry about most. But this is a chicken and egg situation. I would say simply that we have to give him the space to deliver on those policies, because that is what will make the difference to people's pockets. That is what will make the difference to the economy. And that is what ultimately, if that's what people are concerned about, will make the difference at the ballot box.
I'm told there's going to be a reshuffle in the next few weeks. Can you look me in the eye? I know I can't see you at the moment, but can you look me in the eye and say that tell me that you weren't offered anything in order to get your vote, and we won't be seeing your name in the reshuffle?
I did not ask to go and see the Prime Minister. I did not get offered anything. I have not asked for anything. So I am doing this. And bear in mind, as you have said to me before, Iain, that the Prime Minister is someone who dispensed with my services at the last reshuffle. So I am not doing this in hope of...
You're very forgiving, Matt, aren't you?
And possibly too forgiving. But I am doing this because I look at what are the right choices for this country, and I say simply that the policies that won the Prime Minister the election in 2019 and I think are being taken forward by this government are the right ones for the country, the right ones for the economy, and the right ones for my constituents.
Matt, thank you very much. Overtly Covert Lawyer on Twitter says, LBC isn't what I imagined I'd be listening to in the gym when I woke up this morning. Not your typical gym listen. You'd be surprised, whatever your name is, because a lot of people actually listen to our podcasts in the gym. In fact, there's one guy that listens to my For the Many podcast swimming up the River Dart. Can you believe? Nikki's in Reading. Hello, Nikki.
Good evening, Ian. Thank you
Hello.
so much for your brilliant coverage this evening. It's been really good.
It's been a pleasure to have you listening.
Yeah, I've been watching on YouTube and commenting with our friends Mackie and Noah this evening. They're loving it as well.
Excellent.
So I've got.
You're Nikki Larkin, aren't you, from my
Nikki
podcast?
Larkin. Yep.
Welcome.
Pleasure. I've just got a few points, Ian. I was actually quite pleased with the volume of MPs voting against, because it is a clear reflection that they've lost trust in him. For 41% of Conservative MPs, that's a clear loss of trust and does make him a lame duck. Second point, I was a bit disappointed, though, that there weren't more cabinet ministers to break the ranks and that there weren't more of them that were brave enough this evening, unfortunately. But the final thing, my final sort of point was that I just don't see longevity for the Prime Minister now, because the economy that we're in and everything at the moment, he loves spending on infrastructure. He's just not cut out to be an economising Prime Minister and to help us through a recession. So I think it's just a matter of time now. Unfortunately, it's just going to be a bit more time than some of us were hoping.
Well, a lot of people are saying on text and Twitter that this is going to be death by 1,000 cuts now, that he's whole below the waterline. It'll be a very slowly sinking ship. Well, Nikki, we will see. And, of course, we will provide you with all the commentary on the For the Many podcast with Jackie Smith and myself. Now, Rishi Sunak, the Chancellor, has tweeted. He said the Prime Minister has won the confidence vote and now it's time to move forward. Tomorrow we'll get back to work, growing the economy and delivering better public services. We are going to hear from Boris Johnson in just a moment, but first let's hear from Gareth in Matlock, far more important. Hello, Gareth.
Yeah, good evening, Ian. It's really good to hear you, and I think your coverage is fabulous, by the way. Especially, you know, I really think it's good. But I think Boris has done really well tonight, actually, because I've been looking at some statistics. Did you say he got 211 votes?
He did, yes, 59%.
Yeah, so I think he's held his ground easily, because, you know, the Conservative Party, it's hard to actually please them these days, isn't it? But I'm looking at the fifth ballot in 2019 when he was given the leadership, and he had 160 MPs, which was 51%. And Jeremy Hunt on that had 77. Now, if you remember at the election, by the election, we had 317 MPs, and Boris Johnson added 51 to that to bring us up to 368. Now, if you go 160 plus 51, that is 211. So he's held his ground, he's kept the 51 that he added. Now, I think these 148, I think about 120 of them are Remainers. Obviously, 77 are Jeremy Hunt.
You don't know that at all.
No, well,
of the 29 MPs that were publicly against Boris Johnson, he put letters into Graham Brady, 17 of them had voted for Brexit.
Well, yeah, they were the ones who were putting the ads above the parapet. They're the ones who I think we don't know what day it is, because I think they're silly, really. I think Boris Johnson's done really well, and I think he should stick to his ground, carry on, and I think at the next election he'll win a victory for us again. And I think he just needs to look at some of those MPs that didn't follow him, because I think Boris Johnson is the right person to take the Conservative Party forward.
Gareth, you are about to hear from Boris Johnson. Let's hear what Boris Johnson has had to say about this result tonight.
40% of your MPs against you.
So, well, I think this is a very good result for politics and for the country. I do. Just in this sense, I think it's a convincing result, a decisive result, and what it means is that as a government we can move on and focus on the stuff that I think really matters to people.
Sorry, I think it's a decisive result. Theresa May did better than you, and your allies wanted her to go straight away. How How is this different? How can you possibly continue?
This is I've got a far bigger mandate from my own parliamentary colleagues, for instance, than I had in 2019. And
Margaret Thatcher had a pretty big mandate from the electorate, but she had to go when it was clear the MPs turned against her.
I'm grateful to colleagues. I'm grateful for the support that they've given me. And of course, I understand that what we need to do now is come together as a government, as a party, and that is exactly what we can now do. And what this gives us is the opportunity to put behind us all the stuff that I know the media have quite properly wanted to focus on for a very long time, and to do our job, which is to focus on the stuff that I think the public actually want us to be talking about, which is what we are doing to help the people of this country and all the things we're doing to take this country forward.
Okay.
And so what this means tonight is that we can focus on exactly that. We can focus on what we're doing to help people with the cost of living, with what we're doing to clear the COVID, with what we're doing to make streets and communities safer by putting more police out. And it gives us the opportunity to continue to unite, to level up, to strengthen our economy. We're going to go through a continuing difficult time because of the inflationary pressures that the world is experiencing. But we have a lot of natural strength, not least the lowest unemployment since 1974. And what I think is important about tonight, and forgive me, I'm going to say it again, I think this is very good news because it allows the government to focus on those issues, and that's what we're going to do.
You say you want to focus on those issues. 148 MPs on your own side are against you. They're going to be dragging you through the mud. How can you possibly govern with those numbers? You really think that's a good result?
I do.
It's a good result.
I certainly think it is, because don't forget that when I first stood to be leader of the Conservative Party in 2019, I didn't get anything like that much support from my colleagues in Parliament. We're doing that, and what we have now is an opportunity to put behind us all the stuff, as I say, that people in the media like going on about. And I think there's a difference in the category of conversation. I know people want to talk about stuff that goes on at Westminster. What I want to talk about is what we as a government are doing
so you
to
can
help
ignore
people.
Those MPs?
And no, what we're going to do now is take the opportunity to unite and deliver. And that's what we want to do.
Are you ruling out a snap election? Is that not the only way forward to stop you from being a lame duck?
Well, what we want to do is to get on, use this moment, which I think is, whatever you may say, I think is decisive and conclusive, and continue with our priorities. And I think those are the.
Yes.
We are going through a period when we have to help people with the cost of living, and we are. £1,200 for 8 million of the most vulnerable households in the country, plus a lot of other support. £400 to help absolutely everybody with the cost of energy. The only reason we can do that is because we have a robust economy, unemployment at the lowest level for 50 years. That is, those are the things that really matter to our country right now. And I am pleased because we now have the chance to talk exclusively about those priorities and not about all sorts of stuff that I know is of obsessive and compulsive interest to my beloved friends in the media. But I don't think really matters as much as the agenda of the government.
So you're in a worse position than Theresa May was after her vote in 2018, and you think this is a good result?
I think it's an extremely good, positive, conclusive, decisive result, which enables us to move on, to unite, and to focus on delivery. And that is exactly what we're going to do.
And to confirm, you're ruling out a snap election?
Sorry, you keep asking about, look...
Just yes or no?
I'm certainly I see no point in focusing on anything else, and I'm certainly not interested in snap elections. What I'm interested in is delivering right now for the people of this country. We've got an amazing agenda. We have a fantastic mandate, a huge biggest majority we secured in 2019 for the Conservatives for 40 years. If you look at what's just happened in Parliament, whatever statistics you want to chuck around, I've got many more MPs supporting me now than I did in 2019. I'm happy with that. We're going to bash on. We have a huge agenda, and we're going to get it done.
So you still think you're a popular Prime Minister in the party and in the country?
Look, can I just say, I think the most important thing, although you may want to focus on me and on politics and on Westminster, I think what matters is what we deliver and what we do. And as a result of this decision tonight by the Parliamentary Party, which I welcome, we have a conclusion to something that's been dragging on for far too long, and we have the ability now to unite, deliver and get on with the people's priorities, and that is what we're going to do. Okay?
Boris Johnson speaking a few moments ago. Now, that was, I thought, rather revealing at the end. George on Twitter also thinks so. He says, I'm off to Ladbrokes to put a bet on a snap election. Well, he didn't rule it out, despite being given many opportunities to do so, did he? A lot of people will be concentrating on that in the newspapers tomorrow. It's 9:49.
Coming up at 10 on LBC, Tom Swarbrick.
Boris Johnson suffers a bigger rebellion than any previous Conservative leader. He's won, but historically no Prime Minister survives a rebellion on that scale. Will he?
Tom Swarbrick on LBC. Iain Dale on LBC.
It's 9 minutes to 10 on LBC. One thing that I've noticed is that there have not been the usual phalanx of cabinet ministers fanning out over the entire media over the last hour. We've had a couple of them, but let's face it, two of the more junior ones. I haven't seen on my TV screens any of the main cabinet players on the TV screens. They had that, Theresa May had that after her vote of confidence. John Major certainly did in 1995, and Margaret Thatcher certainly did in 1990. I think that is a very sort of noteworthy thing. Christopher Hope is reporting that a Tory rebel MP tells me resignations from the government are now expected tomorrow. So many people would say this ain't over. Keir Starmer has been giving his reaction.
This evening, the Conservative Party had a decision to make, to show some backbone or to back Boris Johnson. The British public are fed up with a Prime Minister who promises big but never delivers. Fed up with a Prime Minister who's presided over a culture of lies and law-breaking at the heart of government. Fed up with a Prime Minister who is utterly unfit for the great office that he holds. Conservative MPs made their choice tonight. They have ignored the British public and hitched themselves and their party firmly to Boris Johnson and everything that he represents. The Conservative Party now believes that good government focused on improving lives is too much to ask. The Conservative government now believes that breaking the law is no impediment to making the law. the Conservative Party now believes that the British public have no right to expect honest politicians.
Keir Starmer speaking a few moments ago. Just to recap on the figures, though, if you just tuned in, 211 votes in favour of Boris Johnson, 148 against. That's 59-41 in percentage terms. Matthew is a new caller in Nottingham. Hi, Matthew.
Oh, hi, Ian. How are you doing?
Hi.
I suppose I didn't really have a question. I just wanted to express I am so exhausted by this. I'm so tired of Boris Johnson. It's just scandal after scandal, lie after lie. It's frustrating that he'll survive for whether it's another 6 months, 12 months. And what's going to be happening next week, the week after, the month after? He's embarrassing as a prime minister. He's embarrassing as a statesman. He's embarrassing as a global leader. To which he'll probably have Ukraine response. Yes, some of the initial response to Ukraine was very powerful, very strong, and very good. Yes, but broken clocks and so forth. I'm frustrated and bored by it. Sorry.
But just because you're frustrated and bored, that does not mean to say that a party should ditch a prime minister, does it? Just because you happen to be bored by it.
I just yes, okay, fair. But I think more just as a citizen of this country, I'm just bored of this.
Well, I think
not that we should move on from this. I'm bored of week after week of this nonsense. This he is a one-man tornado that whichever situation he goes into, he blows everything up and then walks away clapping himself on the back that more people weren't killed.
Well, there are many adjectives to describe that. I'm not sure boring is one of them, because, I mean, whether you agree with him or disagree with him, I mean, here's a politician that isn't boring. I mean, you could use that description of Keir Starmer. You could use it of many people in the Conservative cabinet. You could use it about Ed Davey, the Liberal Democrat leader. I don't think you can use it about Boris Johnson, can you?
As a Liberal Democrat voter, yes, you could describe Ed Davey as that. We are the party of boring, but sensible.
I don't know, Layla Moran, she's not very boring.
But Boris Johnson was very amusing when he strung from a zip line, waving a Union Jack and saying, and shouting "Rule Britannia." Yes, that's all very amusing.
You wouldn't have Keir Starmer doing that. Matthew, I want to get one more caller on before we have to finish.
Fair enough. If I could just conclude, perhaps bored was the wrong word. I am exhausted by it.
Okay. I think maybe a lot of people are. Matthew, thank you. Darryl is in Taunton. Darryl, we haven't got too much time left. What would you like to say?
I'll be brief, Ian. I'll be brief. Good evening. These MPs that are patting themselves on the back, sort of coming out and saying, well, he's got through with the majority and that's what matters. Let's all crack on. Well, they are delusional, because they will lose the by-elections. They'll certainly lose one, if not both, if the polls are anything to go by. And even if he's found not to have misled Parliament, we obviously have the resignations and whatever else to look forward to over the next few days. I mean, they've effectively, this evening, they've bought themselves months, possibly a year, and then handed it over to a hung Parliament or Labour majority. There is the opportunity to kind of get themselves through the next general election. They've just thrown away, and I mean this is the beginning of the end for the party in its current state. That's for certain. That's for certain.
Well, a lot of people are agreeing with you on that, certainly on social media. A couple of texts I've had from Tory MPs and one ex-Tory MP who totally agrees with you. They say he's holed beneath the waterline and it'll be a slow, painful death.
Well, it's interesting that I don't know what my MP has voted this time. I believe she backed Theresa May before, but interesting to speak to 9 out of 10 people I speak to have a either slightly distasteful view or choice language for how it and 1 in 10 has a good thing to say. Now, they've as far as I'm concerned,
Darryl, I have to let you go there because we've nearly reached the end of the programme. Chris on Twitter says, wouldn't it just be nice if we did have a boring Prime Minister? Who said being interesting is a prerequisite of running a country? Well, I hope you've enjoyed the show tonight. Thank you for listening. I'll be back tomorrow from 7 on LBC. Coming up at 1 is Darren Adam. Next, Tom Swarbrick.
Iain, thank you very much indeed. Yes, evening all. Welcome to the show. Tonight at 10.
The vote in favour of Boris Johnson as leader was 211 votes, and the vote against was 148 votes.
Prime Minister Boris Johnson clings on for now.
14 million people voted for the Prime Minister in a general election. I find it utterly bizarre that a small number of MPs think that they can overrule that vote.
The Conservative Party